The earliest mystery of the Erdtree dates back to the age of primordial fog, long before the rise of civilization, hinting at an ancient cosmic origin that predates not only human memory, but the very concept of recorded time itself. This towering golden colossus, visible from nearly every corner of the lands between, stands as both beacon and enigma, its roots burrowing into foundations that no scholar has ever successfully excavated, its branches reaching toward celestial spheres that no astronomer has fully charted, and yet for all its omnipresence, for all the wars fought in its shadow, and the faiths erected around its luminous trunk, the Erdtree guards secrets that have resisted every attempt at understanding across millennia of inquiry. What you are about to witness is not a simple catalog of unanswered questions, but rather an investigation into the deepest and most confounding riddles that Shadow of the Erdtree has woven into its already labyrinthine mythology. Mysteries that span from the primordial mists that shrouded the world before light and form took hold, through the rise and fall of countless kingdoms who believed they understood the tree's purpose, past the forgotten scholars who vanished pursuing its truths, and into our present moment where new discoveries in the shadow realm have not clarified but rather multiplied the paradoxes surrounding this cosmic monument. These are not mere gaps in lore or ambiguous item descriptions left deliberately vague for atmospheric effect. These are fundamental contradictions in the nature of reality itself as presented by the game's world. Questions that strike at the heart of what the Erdtree actually is, where it came from, what intelligence or force might dwell within or beyond it, and why its shadow, that dark reflection explored in the expansion, seems to operate according to laws that directly contradict everything the base game established about the Golden Order and the metaphysics of the lands between. Some of these mysteries concern entities that appear only in fleeting references, figures whose names are whispered in item descriptions, but whose roles in the cosmic drama remain utterly opaque. Others revolve around locations within the shadow realm itself, places that seem to exist in temporal flux or dimensional overlap, where the geography defies mapping and the very passage of time becomes negotiable. Still others focus on artifacts and relics whose properties suggest technologies or magics that predate even the gods themselves, objects that hint at civilizations, or cosmic forces operating on scales that dwarf the already epic conflicts between Marika, the greater will, and the outer gods vying for dominion over the world. The Shadow Realm, that twisted reflection accessible only through Miquella's withered arm, and the path it opens, has proven to be not an answer to the Erdtree's mysteries, but a multiplication of them, a place where every revelation comes packaged with three new impossibilities, where the familiar landmarks of the lands between appear warped through some dark mirror that reveals not truth, but deeper layers of confusion about the fundamental nature of the world. You have walked beneath the Erdtree's boughs. You have perhaps even burned it in pursuit of your ambitions. But have you ever stopped to consider what it means that this supposedly divine tree casts a shadow at all? That its light, which the Golden Order claimed was absolute and all-encompassing, is in fact incomplete, capable of being blocked, refracted, inverted into darkness? Have you wondered why Miquella, the most intellectually gifted of all Marika's children, the demigod who saw furthest and understood most, chose to abandon the Erdtree entirely and pursue his apotheosis through its shadow, through the very negation of everything the golden light represented? These questions are not rhetorical flourishes, but genuine mysteries that the game presents and then refuses to resolve, puzzles that have occupied the community's greatest lore, archaeologists for months since the expansion's release, debates that rage across forums and video comments, with no consensus emerging because the evidence itself seems designed to support multiple contradictory interpretations simultaneously. Consider the nature of Marika herself, the goddess who became the Erdtree or merged with it, or was imprisoned within it depending on which fragments of lore you privilege, and how the Shadow Realm reveals aspects of her past that seem incompatible with her role as the eternal sovereign of the Golden Order. Consider the timeline problems that emerge when you try to reconcile the age of the Erdtree with the age of the world, the suggestions that other trees, other orders, other cosmic structures preceded it, and that what we call the Erdtree might be merely the latest in a series of reality-defining monuments erected by forces playing games across geological timescales. Consider the crucible, that primordial soup of chaotic life from which all things allegedly emerged, and how its relationship to the Erd tree remains fundamentally unclear, whether the tree grew from the crucible or imposed order upon it, or perhaps even created it retroactively through some temporal manipulation that the gods are capable of, but mortals can barely conceive. The Shadow Realm shows us fragments of history that the Erd tree's light had obscured, but these fragments do not assemble into a coherent picture. They are pieces from different puzzles forced into the same frame, and the resulting image is one of profound cosmic horror. The suggestion that the world you have been fighting to save or rule or burn has never been fully real, has always been a construct imposed upon something older and more terrible that writhes beneath the golden veneer. There are characters in the Shadow Realm whose existence raises questions that ripple backward through everything you thought you understood about the base game's narrative. There are boss encounters that seem to reference events or entities never mentioned elsewhere, as if the developers are acknowledging entire chapters of history that were deliberately excised from the main timeline. There are environmental details, architectural styles, artistic motifs that belong to no known civilization within the game's established cultures, suggesting either lost peoples or perhaps visitors from beyond the world entirely, cosmic travelers or dimensional refugees who left their marks in places where the Erd tree's light does not reach and therefore does not rewrite according to its preferred narrative. The Golden Order, we have learned, was an act of curation as much as creation, a selective editing of reality that emphasized certain truths and buried others. And the Shadow Realm represents the return of the repressed, the eruption of all those inconvenient facts and uncomfortable entities that did not fit Marika's vision of eternal golden stasis. But even this interpretation, satisfying as it might seem, fails to account for the deeper paradoxes, the ways in which the Shadow Realm itself seems inconsistent, as if it too is a construct, another layer of deception, or perhaps a battleground where multiple cosmic forces are still contesting for the right to define what is real and what is merely possible. You will encounter in this investigation mysteries that have no clear category, phenomena that blur the line between gameplay mechanic and narrative significance, between developer oversight and intentional ambiguity, and part of the challenge before the lands, between new form, before the greater will cast its gaze upon the world, before even the concept of time held meaning. There existed only the cosmic void. This prehistoric era, known to the few fragmentary sources that survive as the primordial age, represents the absolute beginning of everything we understand about the Erd tree and the shadow it would come to cast across reality itself. In this formless expanse, neither light nor darkness held dominion, for such concepts required structure, and structure did not yet exist. The void was not empty in the traditional sense. Rather, it was a state of pure potential, an infinite canvas awaiting the first stroke of creation. Within this boundless nothingness, something began to change. The ancient cosmic texts, inscribed in languages that predate even the script of the Nox, speak of a stirring, a disturbance in the perfect stillness of the void. This was the awakening of the cosmic weaver, a primordial entity whose nature defies conventional understanding. The cosmic weaver was not a god in the sense that we later come to understand divinity through the lens of the greater will or the outer gods. It was something far more fundamental, an intelligence that existed at the substrate level of reality itself. where gods would later impose order and meaning. The cosmic weaver represented the raw creative force that made such impositions possible. The cosmic weaver's awakening was not instantaneous. According to the fragmentary accounts preserved in the deepest archives of Miquella's research, this entity gradually gained awareness over what might have been eons, though time itself had no true measure in that primordial state. As its consciousness coalesced, it began to act upon the void around it. The weaver's method of creation was unique and would echo through all subsequent ages. It spun threads, not of physical matter, for matter did not yet exist, but of pure energy drawn from the fabric of potentiality itself. Each thread represented a fundamental force, a building block of what would become the laws of nature: gravity, light, entropy, growth. These concepts took their first nascent form as the cosmic weaver drew them forth from the infinite possibilities of the void. The spinning of these threads was not random. The cosmic weaver worked with purpose, weaving a pattern of staggering complexity. Each strand connected to others, forming nodes where multiple forces intersected. These intersections became focal points of concentrated energy, places where the formless void began to take on properties that would later be recognized as the precursors to physical reality. The pattern grew, expanding outward from some central point that the ancient texts refer to as the primordial loom, though whether this was a literal location or a metaphorical concept remains one of the enduring mysteries of this age. From this web of energy, from the accumulated power of countless intersecting threads, something unprecedented emerged. The Erdtree, or rather the protoform that would eventually become the golden beacon we know from later ages, began to manifest. Its emergence was not a sudden event, but a gradual coalescence, as if the tree were being pulled from the void itself, thread by thread, root by root. The Erdtree's roots were the first parts to take form, and they did not grow downward into soil, for soil did not exist. Instead, they plunged directly into the fabric of reality that the cosmic weaver had been constructing, anchoring themselves to the fundamental forces themselves. This is why, in later ages, scholars would observe that the Erdtree seemed to exist simultaneously across multiple planes of existence. It was not merely growing in the world, but was woven into the very structure of what the world would become. As the Erdtree took shape, an unexpected phenomenon occurred. Light had not yet been fully defined as a concept, existing only as one of many threads in the cosmic weaver's pattern. Yet the Erdtree, even in its nascent state, began to interact with these proto-light threads in a way that created something new. It cast a shadow. This was the first shadow, the original darkness that would give the shadow of the Erdtree its name in ages to come. But this shadow was not like the shadows we understand in the physical world. It was a metaphysical shadow, a region where the Erdtree's presence created an absence, a void within the void. This eternal darkness spread across the nascent world, and within it, strange properties began to manifest. The shadow was not merely the absence of light, it was a space where the normal rules being established by the cosmic weaver did not fully apply, a pocket of primordial chaos preserved within the emerging order. The world, such as it was, remained obscured by what the ancient texts call the primordial fog. This fog was not water vapor, not any physical substance, but rather the visual manifestation of reality's incomplete state. Where the cosmic weaver's threads had not yet fully solidified into stable laws of nature, this fog persisted, making it impossible to perceive the true form of the Erdtree or to understand its complete nature. The fog enveloped everything, creating a boundary between the formed and the formless, between what had been woven and what remained pure potential. Within this fog, perception itself became unreliable. The few accounts that claim to describe this era passed down through oral traditions before being transcribed in the early age of the crucible, speak of visions that shifted and changed, of forms that were simultaneously one thing and another. It is from this period that the legends of the cosmic weaver truly take root in the mythological consciousness of later civilizations. The entity that had spun the threads of existence became, in these legends, the secret architect behind the Erdtree itself. Various cultures would interpret the cosmic weaver differently. Some saw it as a benevolent creator, carefully crafting a world of beauty and order. Others viewed it as an indifferent force, weaving without purpose or plan, creating the Erdtree as an accidental byproduct of its cosmic work. Still others, particularly those who would later align themselves with the forces of shadow and chaos, believed the cosmic weaver was deliberately creating imperfections, weaving mysteries into the very foundation of reality that could never be solved, only endlessly contemplated. The connection between the cosmic weaver and the Erdtree became the subject of the first recorded mysteries. Ancient cosmic texts, written in the period immediately following the primordial age, attempted to document what little could be understood about this relationship. These texts, fragments of which survive in the hidden libraries of Lindell and in the sealed archives beneath the Halictree, pose questions that remain unanswered to this day. Was the Erdtree the cosmic weaver's ultimate creation, or was it merely one thread among many in a far larger pattern? Did the weaver create the Erdtree intentionally, or did the tree emerge spontaneously from the web of energy the weaver had constructed? Most troubling of all, the texts ask whether the cosmic weaver still exists, still weaves, still adds new threads to the pattern of reality, even in the present age. These questions took on new significance when the cosmic weaver performed an act that would fundamentally alter the nature of the Erdtree. The entity reached into its own essence, into the core of what made it a conscious, creative force, and drew forth a fragment of itself. This fragment, described in the ancient texts as a mote of pure creative potential wrapped in consciousness, was imbued directly into the Erdtree. The process is said to have taken place at the exact center of the tree, at a point where all the roots converged before spreading outward into the fabric of reality. The cosmic weaver's fragment merged with the Erdtree's structure, and in that moment, the tree gained something it had not possessed before. It gained sentience. This was not sentience as we typically understand it, not the consciousness of a thinking being with desires and fears. The Erdtree's awareness was vast and alien, operating on scales of time and space that individual mortal minds could never comprehend. It became aware of itself, of its roots spreading through reality, of its branches that would eventually reach toward the heavens. More importantly, it became aware of the shadow it cast, that region of primordial darkness that followed its every movement, that grew as it grew. The Erdtree's sentience allowed it to begin shaping its own development, to guide the way it drew energy from the cosmic weaver's threads to influence the world that was forming around it. The first visible sign of this new sentience was a change in the Erdtree's appearance. Until this point, it had been a structure of pure energy, visible only as a distortion in the primordial fog, a place where the formless took on the suggestion of form. But now, infused with the cosmic weaver's essence, the Erdtree began to radiate. A faint, golden glow emerged from its core, spreading outward through its trunk and into its branches. This was not yet the brilliant radiance that would characterize the Erdtree in later ages, but it was the beginning. The golden light represented order, structure, the solidification of the cosmic weaver's threads into something stable and enduring. It pushed back against the primordial fog, creating small clearings of visibility in the otherwise obscured world. This light, faint as it was, had profound effects. It attracted attention. From within the primordial fog itself, beings began to emerge. These were the first conscious entities, besides the cosmic weaver and the newly sentient Erdtree, and they would come to be known as the primordial watchers. The nature of these beings remains deeply mysterious. They were not physical in the way later life forms would be physical. They had no bodies in the conventional sense, existing instead as concentrations of awareness within the fog itself. Some scholars believe the primordial watchers were spontaneous creations, consciousness emerging naturally from the complex patterns the cosmic weaver had woven. Others argue they were intentional creations, servants, or observers placed by the weaver to witness what would unfold. A third theory, more disturbing, suggests the watchers were fragments of consciousness that had always existed in the void, dormant until the Erdtree's light gave them something to focus upon, something to observe. The primordial watchers, those first conscious observers to emerge from the cosmic fog, took upon themselves a sacred duty. They would document the Erdtree's growth and its profound influence on the void that surrounded it. These beings, neither fully corporeal nor entirely ethereal, positioned themselves at varying distances from the great tree, creating observation posts that would later be known as the stellar nodes. And from these vantage points, they recorded how the Erdtree's branches extended not just through physical space, but through the very fabric of reality itself. Each new branch that sprouted seemed to push back the void a little further, replacing the emptiness with something tangible, something that could be measured and understood. The watchers noted that the void did not simply retreat, rather, it transformed. Where once there had been absolute nothingness, now there existed a kind of potential, a pregnant emptiness that seemed to anticipate the arrival of matter and energy. They inscribed their observations onto crystalline tablets that floated in the nascent space around the Erdtree, tablets that would hum with a low frequency whenever the tree underwent a growth spurt. As the watchers continued their meticulous documentation, something unprecedented occurred. A cosmic rift tore open in the space near the Erdtree, a jagged wound in reality itself that pulsed with colors that had no names because eyes capable of perceiving them had not yet evolved. The rift was not stable. It flickered and wavered, sometimes expanding to the width of a dozen Erdtree trunks, sometimes contracting to a mere pinpoint of distorted light. Through this rift, the primordial watchers glimpsed something that shook the foundations of their understanding. They saw alternate realities, worlds where the Erdtree had never taken root, where the cosmic weaver had made different choices, where the fundamental laws of existence operated according to entirely different principles. In one reality, they observed a world consumed by crystalline structures that sang in harmonic frequencies, each crystal a living consciousness connected to all others. In another, they witnessed a realm of pure thought where physical form was considered a primitive limitation. Most disturbing of all, they saw a reality where the void had won, where nothing had ever emerged from the primordial fog, where existence itself had never begun. The cosmic weaver, that entity of unfathomable power and purpose, sensed the opening of the rift. Perhaps it recognized the danger such a tear represented, or perhaps it simply understood that its work in this particular reality was reaching a critical juncture. Whatever the reason, the cosmic weaver made a choice that would echo through all the ages to come. It retreated into the void, not fleeing, but rather withdrawing with deliberate intent. The watchers observed as the weaver's form, which had been intertwined with the Erdtree's uppermost branches, began to dissolve into streams of pure energy that flowed away from the tree and dispersed into the surrounding emptiness. Some watchers theorized that the weaver was distributing itself throughout the void, becoming one with the nothingness so that it might better understand and control it. Others believed the weaver was simply exhausted, having expended too much of its essence in the creation of the Erdtree. Regardless of the true reason, the result was clear. The Erdtree was now alone, left to shape the world according to the patterns and purposes the weaver had encoded within it. With the weaver's departure, the Erdtree seemed to enter a new phase of development. Its roots, which had previously grown in a relatively contained manner, suddenly began to spread with remarkable speed and purpose. They burrowed through the nascent reality, creating pathways and channels that would become the first ley lines of energy across the forming world. These ley lines were not mere conduits. They were living networks that pulsed with the Erdtree's own life force, carrying its influence to the farthest reaches of the emerging cosmos. Where the roots touched the void, solid ground began to form. Where they crossed and intersected, nodes of concentrated power emerged, points where the fabric of reality was thinner and more malleable. The watchers observed that these ley lines formed geometric patterns of stunning complexity, patterns that suggested an underlying mathematical order to the Erdtree's growth. They mapped these patterns obsessively, believing that understanding them would reveal the Erdtree's ultimate design. The primordial watchers recognized that their observations alone would not be sufficient. The mysteries unfolding before them were too vast, too complex to be held in individual memory, even memories as advanced as theirs. They needed a repository, a place where knowledge could be preserved and studied across the vast stretches of time they sensed lay ahead. Thus, they established the first cosmic archives, massive structures that existed partially in physical space and partially in what they termed the conceptual realm, a dimension where ideas and information could be stored in their purest form. The archives were constructed from a material the Watchers called Memoria Stone, a crystalline substance that formed naturally near the Erdtree's trunk and possessed the unique property of being able to hold not just written information, but entire experiences, complete with the emotions and sensory impressions of those who had witnessed events. The Watchers divided themselves into specialized groups, each responsible for studying different aspects of the Erdtree's mysteries. Some focused on the tree's physical growth, measuring each new branch and root with obsessive precision. Others studied the energy patterns that flowed through the ley lines, attempting to predict where new nodes would form. Still others dedicated themselves to monitoring the cosmic rift, documenting the alternate realities that flickered in and out of view. As the Erdtree continued to grow and spread its influence, a phenomenon both beautiful and unsettling began to manifest. The Erdtree's shadow deepened, becoming more than just an absence of light. This shadow took on a substance and presence of its own, creating regions of perpetual darkness that the Watchers named the Shrouded Lands. These were not merely dark places. They were areas where the normal rules of reality seemed to bend and warp. Time moved differently in the Shrouded Lands, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes not in a linear fashion at all. Space itself became unreliable. A watcher might step forward 3 paces in the Shrouded Lands and find themselves leagues away from where they had begun, or they might walk for what felt like hours, only to discover they had moved mere inches. The Shrouded Lands expanded as the Erdtree grew, its shadow lengthening across the nascent world like a dark tide. Most of the Watchers avoided these regions, sensing that they were fundamentally dangerous, that something about the shadow could corrupt or transform those who spent too long within it. But not all Watchers were content to observe from a safe distance. A faction emerged among them, individuals who believed that true understanding required direct experience, even if that experience came with significant risk. They called themselves the Shadow Seekers, and they dedicated themselves to exploring the Shrouded Lands that most of their brethren feared. The Shadow Seekers developed techniques to navigate the warped reality of the dark regions, learning to sense the flow of distorted time and space, adapting their forms to better withstand the strange energies that permeated the shadows. They ventured deeper into the Shrouded Lands than any Watcher had gone before, mapping the unmappable, documenting the paradoxes and impossibilities they encountered. They discovered that the Shrouded Lands were not uniform. Some regions were merely dark and disorienting, while others contained phenomena so bizarre that they defied description in any language the watchers possessed. In one area, they found pools of liquid shadow that reflected not what was, but what might have been, showing alternate versions of events that had already occurred. In another, they encountered echoes of voices speaking words that would not be spoken for countless ages to come. The most significant discovery made by the Shadow Seekers came when they ventured to the very edge of the shrouded lands, to the places where the Erdtree's shadow was deepest and most concentrated. There, pressed against the massive trunk of the tree itself, they found something that should not have been possible. Ancient runes were etched into the Erdtree's bark, symbols of power and meaning that glowed with a faint luminescence even in the absolute darkness of the shadow. The runes were not carved by any external force. They seemed to have grown from within the tree itself, emerging from the wood like scars or birthmarks. The Shadow Seekers recognized immediately that these were not random markings. They were a language, a system of communication far older and more fundamental than anything the Watchers had developed. The runes covered vast sections of the Erdtree's trunk, spiraling around it in complex patterns that hurt to look at for too long, as if the symbols themselves resisted being fully perceived or understood. The Shadow Seekers dedicated themselves to deciphering these runes, a task that would consume generations of their kind. They discovered that the runes revealed cryptic prophecies about the Erdtree's ultimate purpose, hints and suggestions about what the great tree was meant to become, and what role it would play in the unfolding of reality. One prophecy spoke of a time when the Erdtree would bear fruit, and from that fruit would emerge beings of such power that they would reshape the cosmos according to their will. Another foretold of a great conflict, a war that would be fought not with weapons, but with competing visions of what reality should be. A third, or perhaps most troubling, suggested that the Erdtree contained within itself the seeds of its own destruction, that its growth would inevitably lead to a crisis that would threaten to unmake everything it had created. The Shadow Seekers brought their findings back to the cosmic archives, where the other Watchers studied them with a mixture of fascination and dread. As the Watchers struggled to interpret the prophecies, something even more extraordinary occurred. The Cosmic Weaver's essence, which had been distributed throughout the void, began to manifest within the Erdtree itself. It started as a whisper, a barely perceptible vibration in the tree's wood that the most sensitive Watchers could detect. Gradually, this vibration resolved itself into something that could be understood as a voice, though it was not a voice in any conventional sense. It was more like a direct transmission of meaning, a flow of information and intention that bypassed language entirely and communicated on a level that was simultaneously more primitive and more sophisticated than words. The voice spoke to the primordial Watchers, offering guidance and instruction, answering some questions while posing others that were even more profound. It confirmed that the Erdtree was indeed growing according to a plan, though it suggested that the plan was not fixed, but rather adaptive, changing in response to circumstances and possibilities that even the Cosmic Weaver had not fully anticipated. The primordial Watchers interpreted the voice as a call to action, a summons to take on a new role beyond mere observation and documentation. They understood that they were being asked to protect the Erdtree from unknown threats, dangers that the voice hinted at but did not fully describe. These threats were not immediate, the voice suggested, but they were inevitable. As the Erdtree grew and its influence spread, it would attract attention from forces that existed beyond the boundaries of this reality, entities that might seek to corrupt it, control it, or destroy it for reasons the Watchers could not yet comprehend. The voice instructed them to establish defenses, to create wards and barriers that would shield the Erdtree from external interference. It also warned them that some threats would come from within, that the Erdtree's own growth and the changes it wrought upon reality would create instabilities and contradictions that could prove just as dangerous as any external enemy. The Watchers accepted this charge solemnly, understanding that they were no longer merely witnesses to the unfolding of creation, but active participants in shaping its course. The cosmic storm that erupts near the Erdtree in this primordial age is unlike anything the universe has witnessed before. This is not merely weather or atmospheric disturbance, but a fundamental rupture in the fabric of reality itself. The storm manifests as spiraling torrents of raw energy, each tendril crackling with the combined essence of light and shadow that has been building within the Erdtree since its first moments of existence. The bark of the great tree, which has grown thick and ancient even in these early epochs, begins to splinter under the pressure of forces it was never designed to contain. Massive fragments, some as large as mountains, others as small as seeds, are torn free and scattered into the void beyond. Each piece carries within it a fragment of the Erdtree's fundamental nature, the dual essence of creation and dissolution, light and shadow, order and chaos. The storm rages for what the primordial watchers will later calculate as 7 cycles of the cosmic wheel, though time itself becomes distorted in the maelstrom, making precise measurement nearly impossible. As these fragments drift through the infinite void, something remarkable begins to occur. The pieces of bark, infused as they are with the Erdtree's creative essence, do not simply decay or dissolve into nothingness. Instead, they begin to germinate. The fragments become seeds in the truest sense, each one containing the potential for new worlds, new realities, new expressions of existence. Some of these seeds will drift for eons before finding purchase in distant corners of the cosmos. Others will collide with existing matter, transforming it, reshaping it according to the patterns encoded within the Erdtree's essence. The primordial watchers observe this process with a mixture of wonder and growing concern. They understand that they are witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a form of cosmic reproduction that could fundamentally alter the structure of all reality. Each seed carries not just the potential for physical worlds, but for entire systems of meaning, law, and existence. Some will grow into realms of pure radiance, where the light aspect of the Erdtree dominates. Others will become domains of shadow, where darkness holds sway. Still others will maintain the delicate balance between the two, creating worlds of complexity and nuance that mirror the Erdtree itself. The observation of this cosmic seeding event proves to be the catalyst that fractures the unity of the primordial watchers themselves. For countless ages, these ancient beings have maintained a singular purpose: to observe and record without interference. But the scattering of the Erdtree's seeds forces them to confront a fundamental question that can no longer be avoided. Should they continue to merely watch, or do they have a responsibility to act? The debate that erupts among them is not a simple disagreement, but a philosophical schism that cuts to the very core of their existence and purpose. One faction, which will come to be known as the Guardians of Light, argues that the Erdtree's radiance represents the highest expression of cosmic order and must be preserved at all costs. They believe that the light aspect of the Erdtree, the force of creation, structure, and meaning, is fundamentally good and necessary for the flourishing of all existence. Their leader, an entity the records name only as the first luminary, articulates a vision of cosmic stewardship in which the Watchers must actively protect the Erdtree's secrets and ensure that its light continues to shine across all realities. The opposing faction, which embraces the title of Harbingers of Shadow, sees the situation from an entirely different perspective. They argue that the shadow aspect of the Erdtree is not something to be feared or suppressed, but rather a source of tremendous power and potential that has been unjustly neglected. Their spokesman, known in the ancient texts as the Voice of the Abyss, contends that true cosmic balance requires not the dominance of light over shadow, but the active cultivation and harnessing of darkness for purposes that the universe has not yet imagined. The Harbingers believe that within the Erdtree's shadow lies the key to transcending the limitations of existence itself, to achieving forms of power and understanding that go beyond mere observation and preservation. They do not see themselves as villains or corruptors, but as visionaries willing to explore the full spectrum of cosmic possibility. Their philosophy holds that the Erdtree's dual nature is not a problem to be managed, but an invitation to transformation that should be enthusiastically accepted. The vows taken by the Guardians of Light are recorded in crystallized thought forms that still exist in the deepest archives of reality. They swear by the first light of creation itself to stand as eternal sentinels over the Erdtree's radiance. Their oath encompasses multiple specific commitments, each one designed to ensure that the tree's luminous aspects remain uncorrupted and accessible only to those deemed worthy. They vow to maintain the integrity of the light seeds scattered across the cosmos, to prevent their contamination by shadow essence, and to guide the development of any worlds that grow from them toward order and harmony. They commit themselves to preserving the knowledge of the Erdtree's origins, but only in forms that cannot be misused or perverted. They establish the first sacred barriers, energetic constructs designed to shield the most sensitive aspects of the Erdtree from those who would seek to exploit them. The Guardians develop elaborate protocols for intervention, carefully defined circumstances under which they will break their ancient practice of pure observation in order to protect the light. Meanwhile, the Harbingers of Shadow pursue their own agenda with equal fervor and considerably less restraint. They begin conducting experiments on the shadow-infused fragments of Erdtree bark, seeking to understand and amplify the darkness within them. Their methods are not crude or destructive, but rather sophisticated and methodical. They develop techniques for extracting shadow essence and concentrating it, for attuning their own beings to resonate with the frequencies of darkness, for perceiving layers of reality that exist beneath and beyond the visible spectrum of light. The Harbingers establish hidden laboratories in the spaces between worlds, locations where the normal laws of reality are already thin and malleable. In these secret places, they work to unlock what they call the shadow potential, the latent capabilities that they believe lie dormant within the dark half of the cosmic equation. They create the first shadow catalysts, objects and entities specifically designed to channel and amplify darkness. Some of their experiments succeed beyond their expectations, producing phenomena of terrible beauty and power. Others fail catastrophically, creating localized zones of chaos and dissolution that will persist for ages to come. The cosmic conflict that erupts between these two factions is inevitable, but its scale and ferocity shock even those ancient beings who have witnessed the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. The war begins not with a single dramatic confrontation, but with a series of escalating skirmishes fought across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The Guardians of Light attempt to seal off the Harbingers' laboratories, to confiscate their shadow catalysts, to prevent what they see as dangerous and irresponsible experimentation. The Harbingers respond by sabotaging the Guardians' protective barriers, by infiltrating their archives to steal the secrets they claim to protect, by demonstrating through direct action that shadow power cannot be simply suppressed or ignored. The battles between them are unlike any warfare that will occur in later ages. These are conflicts fought with fundamental forces, with reality itself as the battlefield and the stakes. Entire regions of space are restructured as collateral damage. Timelines are fractured and rewoven. The very concepts of cause and effect become unstable in the war zones. Neither side can claim clear victory, as each possesses capabilities that the other cannot fully counter. The Guardian's light can dispel and purify shadow, but it cannot eliminate it entirely. The Harbinger's darkness can corrupt and transform light, but it cannot extinguish it completely. As this cosmic war rages, the Erdtree itself undergoes a dramatic transformation that neither faction anticipated or desired. The shadow aspect of the great tree, which has always been present, but largely contained, begins to expand dramatically. This is not a simple growth, but an active spreading, as if the shadow has gained a will and purpose of its own. The darkness flows out from the base of the Erdtree like a living tide, enveloping entire regions in its embrace. The lands touched by this expanding shadow do not simply become dark in the visual sense. They are fundamentally altered, transformed into spaces where the normal rules of existence no longer fully apply. In these shadow enveloped regions, matter becomes mutable and responsive to thought. Time flows inconsistently, faster in some areas, slower in others, sometimes reversing entirely. Consciousness itself becomes strange and fluid, as beings within the shadow find their thoughts and identities bleeding into one another. The primordial watchers, both guardians and harbingers, are forced to confront the possibility that their conflict has awakened something within the Erdtree that neither side truly understands or can control. The return of the cosmic weaver in this moment of crisis is brief but profoundly significant. The ancient architect appears without warning, manifesting not in a single location, but simultaneously at multiple points around the Erdtree's perimeter. The weaver's form is different now, less solid and more ephemeral, as if the act of creating the Erdtree has diminished this primordial being in some fundamental way. Without addressing either the guardians or the harbingers directly, the weaver begins to work, manipulating the fundamental threads of reality with the same skill displayed during the Erdtree's initial creation. The protective barrier that takes shape is not a simple wall or shield, but a complex multidimensional structure that exists across several layers of reality simultaneously. It is woven from strands of pure order, extracted from the deepest foundations of cosmic law, and reinforced with patterns of meaning that predate language itself. The barrier does not separate light from shadow or prevent the Erdtree's growth, but rather establishes boundaries and channels, ensuring that the tree's expansion, both luminous and dark, follows paths that will not tear reality apart entirely. The work takes an immense toll on the cosmic weaver, and the primordial watchers can observe the being's essence growing thinner, more transparent, as the barrier nears completion. Before departing, perhaps forever, the cosmic weaver leaves a final message, encoded not in words, but in a pattern of pure meaning that the primordial watchers must spend ages fully deciphering. The message, when finally understood, consists of a single profound statement that will echo through all subsequent ages. The Erdtree's fate is intertwined with all existence. This is not metaphor or poetry, but literal truth. The weaver reveals that the Erdtree is not simply a tree that exists within the universe, but rather a fundamental axis around which reality itself is structured. Its growth, its balance between light and shadow, its health or corruption, all of these directly affect the stability and nature of existence on every scale. The seeds scattered into the void are not merely creating new worlds, but establishing nodes in a vast cosmic network, each one connected to the original Erdtree through bonds that transcend space and time. The message carries an implicit warning as well, that any attempt to destroy the Erdtree or to fundamentally alter its nature could have consequences that ripple across all of reality, potentially unmaking existence itself. The age of primordial fog draws to a close not with a sudden ending, but with a gradual transformation that takes place over countless cycles. The light of the Erdtree, which has been struggling against the fog since the tree's first emergence, finally begins to gain the upper hand. The radiance intensifies not through any deliberate action by the guardians of light, but as a natural consequence of the Erdtree's continued growth and maturation. The fog, which has defined this entire epoch, begins to thin and disperse. Visibility increases. The boundaries between different regions of space become clearer and more stable. The shadow that expanded so dramatically during the cosmic conflict does not recede, but it does stabilize, finding a new equilibrium with the light. The worlds growing from the scattered seeds begin to develop their own distinct characteristics and histories. The primordial Watchers, still divided into their two factions, but exhausted by their conflict, establish an uneasy truce and begin the long process of adapting to a cosmos that is becoming more defined, more structured, and more complex with each passing moment. We emerge now from the age of primordial fog into a time of awakening. Around 10,000 years before the Common Era, the world transforms. The mists that once shrouded the land begin to thin, revealing something that would define the course of all history to follow. The Erdtree, that colossal golden pillar of light and life, breaks through the dissipating fog and establishes itself as the axis upon which civilization itself will turn. The Erdtree's emergence is not a sudden event, but rather a gradual revelation. As the fog recedes year by year, scattered tribes of humans who had survived in isolated pockets during the age of primordial fog begin to see the golden glow on the horizon. At first, many believe it to be a distant fire, a mountain of gold, or even the eye of some slumbering god. Tribal shamans report visions of warmth and plenty emanating from the direction of the light. Hunters who venture closer return with tales of soil that yields crops without effort, of animals that gather peacefully in its vicinity, of water that runs pure and sweet from springs near its base. The Erdtree becomes a lodestone, drawing the scattered remnants of humanity toward its promise of abundance. Within 3 generations of its full revelation, tribal leaders from across the known world make the pilgrimage to stand beneath its boughs. These are not unified peoples, but fractured groups, each with their own customs, languages, and gods. The gathering that takes place at the Erdtree's base is unprecedented in scope. Chieftain Valmar of the northern clans arrives with his warriors. Queen Thessia of the river peoples brings her council of wise women. The mountain lords, the coastal tribes, the people of the Red Stone all send their most respected leaders. What compels them is not merely the Erdtree's physical grandeur, though it towers higher than any mountain they have known, but rather an inexplicable pull, a sense that this place represents something fundamental to their continued survival. The negotiations that follow are tense and complex. These tribes have known only isolation and competition for scarce resources during the long fog. Now they must forge something new. It is Valmar who first proposes the concept of a unified society, not through conquest, but through shared reverence. He argues that the Erdtree itself is a gift that transcends tribal boundaries, that its light shines equally on all peoples. Thessia counters that unity without structure will collapse into chaos, that they must establish laws and hierarchies. The debates stretch across seasons, but gradually a consensus emerges. They will build a civilization centered on the Erdtree, one that honors both its power and the diversity of peoples who gather beneath it. The first temple rises at the base of the Erdtree as a monument to this newfound unity. Its construction is a collaborative effort that takes 7 years to complete. The northern clans provide timber from the great forests at the world's edge. The river peoples transport massive stones along waterways they have navigated for generations. The mountain lords contribute their knowledge of architecture and engineering, designing a structure that can withstand earthquakes and storms. The temple itself is a marvel of early construction, a circular edifice with walls 20 feet thick and a central chamber open to the sky, allowing the Erdtree's light to pour directly onto the altar within. Every stone is carved with symbols from the various tribes, a visual language of unity and diversity. As the temple nears completion, a new class emerges within this nascent civilization. The priests of the Erdtree are drawn from all tribes, selected not for their lineage or martial prowess, but for their devotion and wisdom. These priests take upon themselves the sacred duty of understanding the Erdtree, of mediating between its divine presence and the mortal peoples who depend upon it. They begin the meticulous work of recording rituals and prayers on stone tablets, creating what will become the foundational texts of Erdtree worship. The tablets describe proper offerings, the correct words to speak at dawn and dusk, the festivals that must be observed to maintain harmony with the Erdtree's cycles. High Priest Malin, formerly a shaman of the coastal tribes, develops a standardized script that can be understood across linguistic barriers, a writing system that combines pictographs with phonetic elements. This script becomes the common tongue of the priesthood and eventually of the entire civilization. The priest's observations are exhaustive and precise. They note that the Erd tree's light waxes and wanes with subtle rhythms, that certain branches glow more brightly during specific seasons, that the roots pulse with energy that can be felt through the earth itself. They record which crops grow best, in which zones of the Erd tree's influence, how far its blessing extends, and what happens at the boundaries where its power fades. These are not merely religious texts, but practical guides for agriculture, medicine, and governance. The civilization flourishes under this systematic approach to understanding their world's central mystery. Then comes the event that will cast everything in a different light, quite literally. During a rare celestial alignment in the civilization's 43rd year, when 3 moons converge in the sky and the sun reaches its zenith at the precise moment of the summer solstice, a shadow is observed. The Erdtree, which has until this moment existed as pure radiance, casts a shadow across the land. This should not be possible. The Erdtree's light emanates from within, from every branch and leaf and root. It is not merely reflecting sunlight, but generating its own luminescence. Yet there it is, a vast darkness stretching eastward, covering miles of cultivated land in sudden gloom. The shadow persists for exactly 1 hour before fading as the celestial alignment shifts. In that hour, the temperature drops noticeably. Animals flee from the shadow's path. Plants within its reach visibly wilt. People caught within the shadow report feelings of profound unease, of being watched by something vast and incomprehensible. When the shadow finally recedes and the Erd tree's normal radiance returns, the civilization is left shaken. The priests convene emergency councils. The tribal leaders demand explanations. The common people whisper of curses and divine displeasure. Scholars within the priesthood immediately begin theorizing about the shadow's significance. A faction led by scholar Theron proposes that the shadow represents a divine message, a deliberate communication from whatever power animates the Erd tree. He argues that nothing about the Erd tree is accidental, that its very existence defies natural law, and therefore the shadow must serve a purpose. Theron and his followers spend months analyzing the shadow's path, interviewing those who stood within it, studying the plants and soil affected by its passage. They discover that while the shadow caused temporary distress, the land it touched actually becomes more fertile in the weeks that follow, yielding harvests 20% larger than surrounding areas. This, Theron argues, proves the shadow is ultimately benevolent, a form of divine fertilization or blessing that requires temporary darkness to achieve lasting light. An opposing school of thought emerges under scholar Vasra, who interprets the shadow as an omen of danger. Vasra points to the ancient texts from the age of primordial fog, fragmentary records that speak of cycles of destruction and renewal. She argues that the shadow represents the Erd tree's opposite, a force of entropy and ending that exists in balance with the tree's creative power. Where Theron sees blessing, Vasra sees warning. She notes that the shadow appeared during a celestial alignment, suggesting it is tied to cosmic forces beyond the Erd tree itself, forces that may not have humanity's best interests at heart. Her faction begins searching for references to shadows in the oldest surviving myths, finding disturbing parallels in stories of the world before the fog, tales of civilizations that rose high only to fall into darkness. The debate between these two interpretations consumes the scholarly class for years. Public lectures draw crowds of thousands. Philosophical treatises are inscribed on tablets and distributed throughout the growing cities. The civilization's first true intellectual culture blossoms from this fundamental disagreement about the nature of their world. It is in this climate of intense inquiry that the first formal prophecy is inscribed. A council of the most respected scholars from both factions collaborates to create a text that attempts to reconcile their views. The prophecy of the shadowed cycle, as it becomes known, describes a pattern of doom and rebirth linked directly to the shadow. It predicts that the shadow will return at intervals determined by celestial mechanics, that each return will be longer and darker than the last, and that eventually a final shadow will fall that will test whether the civilization has grown strong enough to endure. The prophecy does not predict destruction, but rather transformation, arguing that each cycle of shadow and light refines the world, burning away weakness and allowing new growth. The prophecy's inscription is treated as a momentous occasion. The tablet on which it is written is made from a rare black stone quarried from deep beneath the earth, polished until it reflects like dark water. The words are inlaid with gold dust mixed with sap from the Erdtree itself, creating letters that shimmer even in dim light. The tablet is installed in the temple's central chamber, positioned so that the Erdtree's light falls directly upon it during the noon hour. Pilgrims travel from the civilization's furthest reaches to read the prophecy, to contemplate its implications for their lives and their children's lives. To provide ongoing interpretation of both the prophecy and the shadow phenomenon, a council of elders is formally established. This council of the shadow, as it becomes known, consists of 9 members drawn from the priesthood, the scholarly class, and the tribal leadership. They meet in a chamber constructed specifically for their deliberations, a circular room with 9 seats, arranged around a central pool of still water that reflects the Erdtree's light from above. The council's mandate is to observe, to study, to debate, and ultimately to advise the civilization on how to prepare for future shadow events. They establish a network of watchtowers across the land, stations where trained observers monitor the sky for signs of approaching alignments. They commission the creation of elaborate astronomical instruments, bronze armillaries, and stone calendars that track the movements of sun, moons, and stars with increasing precision. It is during the Council's 3rd year of operation that workers excavating beneath the Erdtree's roots for a new temple foundation make an extraordinary discovery. At a depth of 30 feet, in a chamber that appears to have been deliberately carved from the living rock, they find the Shard of Eternity. The object is unlike anything in the civilization's experience. It is a crystalline fragment, roughly the size of a human head, multifaceted and constantly shifting in color. At times it glows with the same golden light as the Erdtree. At other times, it darkens to deep amber or even black. Most remarkably, it seems to pulse with a rhythm that matches the Erdtree's own subtle fluctuations in luminescence, as if the two are connected by invisible threads of power. The workers who discover the shard report feeling overwhelming awe in its presence, a sense that they are touching something fundamental to reality itself. When High Priest Malin is summoned to examine the find, he immediately recognizes its significance. The shard, he declares, holds the essence of the Erdtree's power, perhaps a fragment of whatever divine force first brought the tree into being. He orders the excavation site sealed and places guards around it, while the Council of the Shadow convenes an emergency session to determine how to proceed. The debates within the Council are heated and prolonged. Some members argue the shard should be left where it was found, that disturbing it might anger whatever powers placed it there. Others insist it must be studied, that understanding the shard could unlock the secrets of the Erdtree itself and perhaps provide insight into the shadow phenomenon. A compromise is eventually reached. The shard will be carefully removed from its underground chamber and housed in a new temple constructed specifically for its protection and study. This temple will be built adjacent to the original Erdtree temple, but separate from it, a structure dedicated entirely to the shard and its mysteries. The construction of the Shard Temple takes 5 years and represents the pinnacle of the civilization's architectural achievement. The building is designed as a perfect cube. Each wall, precisely 100 feet, is in length, constructed from white marble quarried from mountains 300 miles distant. The interior is a single vast chamber with the shard positioned on a pedestal at the exact center. The walls are inscribed with every scrap of knowledge the civilization has accumulated about the Erdtree, creating a comprehensive archive of their understanding. The ceiling is inlaid with precious metals arranged to mirror the constellations, allowing scholars to study the relationship between celestial patterns and the Erdtree's behavior without leaving the shard's presence. To guard this precious artifact and to conduct research into its properties, a new order is established. The Order of the Eternal Flame takes its name from the shard's appearance when it glows most brightly, like a flame that burns without consuming. The Order's members are selected through rigorous testing of both physical prowess and intellectual capacity. They must be warriors capable of defending the shard against any threat, but also scholars able to contribute to its study. The first Grandmaster of the Order is Cale Ironheart, a former mountain lord renowned for both his skill with blade and his philosophical writings on the nature of duty and sacrifice. Under Cale's leadership, the Order of the Eternal Flame begins systematic study of the shard's properties. They discover that it responds to certain frequencies of sound, glowing more brightly when specific musical notes are played. They find that it affects the growth of plants placed near it, accelerating their life cycles and producing specimens of unusual size and vitality. Most intriguingly, they observe that individuals who spend extended time in the shard's presence report enhanced mental clarity and occasional visions of places and times beyond their own experience. Some claim to see the world as it was during the age of primordial fog. Others describe visions of a future where the Erdtree has grown to encompass the entire sky. The Order meticulously documents these visions, searching for patterns that might reveal deeper truths. Yet even as the civilization reaches new heights of knowledge and prosperity, the seeds of division continue to grow. The rift between those who interpret the shadow as warning and those who see it as blessing widens into a philosophical chasm that threatens social cohesion. Scholar Theron's faction, now calling themselves the Illuminated, argue that the discovery of the shard proves the shadow is part of the Erdtree's natural cycle, that light and shadow are complementary aspects of a single divine truth. Scholar Vazra's faction, the Vigilant, counter that the shard's very existence beneath the earth suggests it was hidden, perhaps imprisoned, that it may be the source of the shadow rather than a key to understanding the light. The tension reaches a critical point when a prophetess named Althara emerges from the common people. Althara is not a priest or scholar, but a simple farmer's daughter from a village at the edge of the Erdtree's influence. She claims to have been visited by visions since childhood, dreams of a great darkness that will one day swallow the Erdtree whole. For years, she kept these visions private, fearing ridicule or punishment. But as she grows into adulthood and the visions intensify, she feels compelled to speak. Althara travels to the capital and demands an audience with the Council of the Shadow. When initially refused, she begins preaching in the public squares, drawing crowds with her passionate warnings. The shadow, she proclaims, is not a blessing or a simple omen, but a herald of the civilization's inevitable downfall. She describes in vivid detail a future where the Erdtree's light fails, where the shadow becomes permanent, where everything they have built crumbles into dust and ruin. Her prophecies are specific and disturbing, naming landmarks that will fall, describing plagues and famines, speaking of betrayals and wars that will tear the civilization apart from within. As the sect of Althara solidified its presence in the ancient world. Their preparations for the prophesied doom took on a more structured form. Temples carved into the cliffs of the Elthar Basin became their sanctuaries, where initiates trained in rites of purification and visions of the coming shadow. These followers, known as the Watchers of the Hollow Sky, believed their role was not to prevent the Erdtree's decline, but to shepherd the faithful through its inevitable fall. Their teachings spread quietly at first, whispered in the markets of the great city-state of Vorthal, and etched into the standing stones of the hinterlands. But their growing influence did not go unnoticed. The Order of the Eternal Flame, the dominant religious institution of the era, viewed Althura's sect as a direct challenge to their doctrine. The Eternal Flame's high priests, led by the zealous Hierophant Dain, preached that the Erdtree's light was unassailable, its blessings eternal. To suggest otherwise was heresy. The first recorded clash between the two factions erupted in the streets of Vorthal during the Festival of Embers, a sacred celebration meant to honor the Erdtree's everlasting radiance. Althara's followers disrupted the procession, scattering ashes instead of petals, symbolizing their belief in the coming end. The confrontation turned violent when flame acolytes, armed with ceremonial brands, drove the dissenters from the city. This skirmish marked the beginning of an ideological war, one that would fracture the unity of the early civilization. Then came the drought. The great river Nith, which had nourished the farmlands of the Erdtree's heartland for centuries, dwindled to a trickle. Crops withered, and the once fertile plains of Lorath became cracked wastelands. Famine followed, and with it, unrest. The Eternal Flame's priests blamed the drought on the Watchers of the Hollow Sky, claiming their defiance had angered the Erdtree. Yet even as they offered sacrifices of grain and wine, the land remained barren. Desperation turned to panic when the Erdtree itself began to show signs of decay. Its golden leaves, which had never before fallen, browned at the edges, drifting to the ground like embers. The sight sent shockwaves through the populace. For the first time, the people questioned whether their guardians had been wrong. High Priest Dain ordered a grand ritual at the base of the Erdtree, summoning the most revered clerics to channel its dwindling energy. They chanted the Litany of Unbroken Light, a sacred hymn said to have been passed down from the tree's first guardians. But as the ceremony reached its crescendo, the Erdtree did not respond. The priests' staffs, usually alight with golden radiance, flickered and died. The failure was catastrophic, not just logistically, but spiritually. If the eternal flame could not reignite the Erdtree's vitality, what hope remained? Amid the growing despair, an artifact long kept in the vaults of Vorthal's scholars began to emit an eerie glow. The Shard of Eternity, a fragment of an unknown celestial body said to predate the Erdtree itself, pulsed with a light that matched neither sun nor flame. The Watchers of the Hollow Sky interpreted this as a sign. The shadow was nearing, and the shard was awakening to herald its arrival. Althara herself stood before the artifact, declaring that its light was a beacon, not of doom, but of transition. Her words resonated with those who had lost faith in the old ways, and her sect's ranks swelled. It was during this time that a scholar named Kyle, once a loyal chronicler for the Eternal Flame, uncovered a series of fragmented texts buried beneath the ruins of an older temple complex. These writings, etched in a script so ancient even the high priest could not decipher it, spoke of cycles. Kyle, with his knowledge of Proto-Erdtree dialects, pieced together a terrifying truth. The shadow was not an anomaly. It had happened before. The texts referenced a great withering, an era when the Erdtree's predecessor, a being or entity only called the First Root, had succumbed to a similar decay. The civilization that had worshipped it had fallen, and from its ashes, the current order had risen. Cahill's theory was radical. The shadow was not an end, but a turning point, a necessary death for rebirth. When he presented his findings to the Council of Elders, they recoiled. Hierophant Dain accused Kael of spreading the Watcher's heresy, warning that such ideas would only hasten the chaos already gripping the land. The council ordered the text destroyed and forbade Kael from speaking of them. But the scholar, now doubting everything he had once served, continued his work in secret. He discovered more evidence: carvings in hidden catacombs, star charts aligned with the Shard of Eternity's pulses, all pointing to a pattern. The Erdtree was not the first, and it would not be the last. Meanwhile, Althara's sect grew bolder. They preached openly now, urging the people to abandon the Erdtree's worship before its fall consumed them all. The Eternal Flame, sensing their grip on power slipping, took drastic action. At the behest of Hierophant Dain, the council declared Althara and her followers heretics, banishing them from the Heartlands under penalty of death. Many watchers fled to the fringes of the known world, seeking refuge in the caves of the hollow peaks or the mist-shrouded forests beyond. But the persecution only deepened the divide. Those who remained behind began to question whether the flame's brutality was proof of their own fear, proof that the shadow was real. Then the plague came. It began with a cough, a fever, then blackened veins spreading like roots beneath the skin. The sickened died within days, their bodies crumbling to ash upon their final breath. The Eternal Flame called it a punishment for disobedience, but even their most devout were not spared. The Watchers, though exiled, claimed it was the Shadow's approach, a thinning of the veil between eras. Panic turned to terror when the Erdtree's shadow, once a faint silhouette at dusk, began to darken even at midday. Prophecies of doom, once whispered, were now shouted in the streets. And through it all, Kyle worked in silence. In a hidden chamber beneath the ruins of an older library, he uncovered the final piece of the puzzle, a mural depicting not one, but many Erdtrees, each rising and falling in turn. At the center of the cycle stood a figure, a being neither god nor mortal, but something in between. The inscriptions called it the gardener, the one who tended the roots of each era. Kyle's hands trembled as he realized the truth. The shadow was not just an end, it was a harvest. But who or what was the gardener? And what would it mean for those still clinging to the light? The answers, if they existed at all, lay in the shadow's embrace. And as the world edged closer to its reckoning, even the bravest souls began to wonder, was it better to resist the coming dark, or to step willingly into its grasp? And so, with the Shard of Eternity now in the hands of Althara's followers, the fragile balance of the first civilization teetered on the brink. The Shard, a luminous fragment of the Erdtree's primordial essence, said to contain the power to halt the encroaching shadow, had been taken not out of greed, but desperation. Althara's sect, a splinter group of scholars and mystics, believed the ruling order of the Eternal Flame had grown complacent, that their rituals were too slow, too cautious to stave off annihilation. To them, the shard was not a relic to be guarded, but a tool to be wielded. Their theft was an act of defiance, a gamble for survival. Yet in their haste, they failed to grasp the shard's true nature. It was not a key to salvation, but a catalyst for cycles. The Order's response was swift, though ultimately futile. Led by High Sentinel Voithus, a contingent of Flame Wardens pursued Althara's sect into the jagged wastes beyond the Erdtree's light. What they found there was not a battle, but a warning. The wastes had already begun to shift, the ground fracturing under the weight of the Shadow's advance. Vathus's forces were forced to turn back, their ranks thinned by collapsing terrain and strange half-seen entities that slithered through the cracks. The expedition's failure was a death knell for the Order's authority. Without the shard, their rituals grew weaker, their flames dimmer. The great forges of the capital, once fed by the Erdtree's blessings, sputtered and died. Aqueducts ran dry, their channels choked with blackened roots. The civilization's infrastructure, once a marvel of unity, now crumbled from within. As resources dwindled, the temples of the Erdtree were the first to be abandoned. These towering sanctuaries, where priests had once deciphered the tree's whispers, now stood hollow. The stone tablets within, etched with prophecies of the shadow's cyclical return, were left to the elements. Wind scoured their surfaces, rain blurred their glyphs, yet a few resilient fragments endured, their warnings preserved by chance. Among them was the work of Kale, the reclusive scholar who had devoted his life to studying the shadow's patterns. His final tablet, unfinished, spoke of a convergence, a moment when the shadow would not merely advance but consume. Then, without explanation, Kale vanished. So his chambers were found undisturbed, his research scattered but intact. Some claimed he had fled into the shadow itself, seeking answers beyond the veil. Others whispered that the shadow had taken him, as it would take them all. Althara's sect, meanwhile, had vanished into the wilderness. With the shard of eternity in their possession, they sought refuge in the northern bluffs, a region where the Erdtree's light had always been thin. Their fate remains one of the era's greatest mysteries. No trace of them was ever found. No bodies, no artifacts, not even the shard itself. Some believe they succeeded in their goal, that they unlocked the shard's power and transcended the cycle. Others argue they were the first to fall to it, their souls consumed by the very force they sought to control. Whatever the truth, their disappearance marked the final fracture of the old world. What remained of the civilization gathered one last time at the base of the Erdtree. This was not a rally, not a defiance, but a surrender. The few surviving flame wardens, their armor cracked and soot-stained, lit a final pyre. The priests, those who had not fled or fallen, chanted the old invocations, though their voices trembled, and then, as if in answer, the Erdtree's shadow stirred. It did not creep this time, did not inch forward as it had for centuries. It surged, a tide of darkness swallowing the land whole. The pyre's flames guttered and died. The chants turned to screams, and then silence. When the shadow receded, the Erdtree still stood, its golden boughs untouched. But the civilization beneath it was gone. The shard of eternity, if it still existed, was lost to time, its legend fading into rumor. The stone tablets, those that had not been pulverized by the collapse, were buried under rubble, their messages fragmented but enduring. And the shadow itself? It did not vanish, it lingered, a patient observer, as it had before, as it would again. For this was not an end, but a turning. The cycle, as Kyle had foretold, had already begun anew, yet even in oblivion, echoes remained. The next age would stumble upon shards of the past, a half-legible prophecy here, a crumbling temple there, and mistake them for warnings. They were not, they were invitations. The shadow does not erase, it waits. And when the next civilization rises, when they too reach for the shard, when they too believe themselves the exception to the cycle, the shadow will stir once more. This is the pattern, this is the truth, and this is why the Erdtree, ever watching, ever silent, casts its shadow upon the land, not as a threat, but as a reminder. All light must fade, all light will return. The question is not if, but when. And so we turn to the next chapter, where the ashes of the first civilization settle, where new hands uncover old secrets, and where the shadow, ever patient, begins its slow advance once more. The Age of Kings begins in the year 3000 BCE, a pivotal era in the history of the Erdtree and the land it dominates. This period marks the rise of King Aldrich I, a monarch whose reign would forever alter the spiritual and political landscape of the realm. Crowned in a grand ceremony beneath the towering branches of the Erdtree, Aldrich I declared the ancient tree the divine symbol of his rule, a living testament to the connection between the mortal world and the heavens. The Erdtree, already revered by the people, became the centerpiece of his kingdom's identity, its golden leaves shimmering like a beacon of divine favor. To solidify this union between his reign and the Erdtree, Aldrich I commissioned the construction of the Grand Sanctum, a monumental temple built at the base of the tree. The sanctum was designed to honor the Erdtree's sacred presence, its towering spires reaching toward the sky as if to bridge the gap between earth and the divine. Crafted from luminous stone quarried from the nearby mountains of Luminara, the Grand Sanctum became a site of pilgrimage for the faithful, its halls echoing with chants and prayers. The king's decree ensured that the sanctum was not merely a place of worship but a symbol of his authority, a testament to his belief that his rule was divinely ordained. It was during this time of fervent devotion that the shadow first made its presence known. On the night of a rare lunar eclipse, the royal astronomer Celestia observed a strange phenomenon. As the moon darkened, a faint, shadowy figure appeared to emerge from the Erdtree's roots, its form indistinct yet undeniably sentient. Celestia, a meticulous scholar known for her precise records, documented the event in her scrolls, describing the shadow as a harbinger of fate. Her writings, preserved in the royal archives, captured the moment with a mix of awe and trepidation. She noted that the shadow seemed to move with purpose, its presence both unsettling and inexplicably divine. King Aldrich III, upon hearing of Celestia's discovery, declared the shadow a divine omen, a sign from the heavens that his reign was blessed. He issued a royal proclamation ordering the shadow's worship across the kingdom, framing it as a sacred duty for all his subjects. This decree gave rise to the cult of the shadow, a religious movement led by High Priestess Ilara, a charismatic figure who claimed to receive visions from the enigmatic entity. Ilara's teachings centered on the shadow as a force of destiny, a guide that would lead the kingdom to prosperity if properly revered. The cult quickly gained influence, its rituals and ceremonies becoming integral to the kingdom's spiritual life. Yet not everyone embraced the shadow with unquestioning faith. Prince Thalor, Aldrich III's eldest son and heir to the throne, harbored suspicions about the Erdtree and its newfound significance. A scholar at heart, Thalor was deeply curious about the tree's origins, a topic his father had declared off-limits. Against the king's wishes, Thalor began a clandestine investigation, driven by a desire to uncover the truth. His inquiries led him to the ancient carvings hidden beneath the Erdtree, relics of a forgotten civilization that predated the kingdom by millennia. These carvings, etched into stone walls deep beneath the earth, depicted scenes of an ancient deity known as the First Gardener. According to the carvings, the Erdtree had been planted by this deity, its roots imbued with a power that transcended mortal understanding. The carvings also hinted at a deeper purpose for the tree, suggesting it was not merely a symbol of divinity, but a tool of immense consequence. Thalor's discovery shook him to his core, raising questions about the true nature of the Erdtree and the shadow that now loomed over his kingdom. King Aldrich III, upon learning of his son's investigations, issued a royal decree forbidding further exploration into the Erdtree's mysteries. The king, and ever mindful of his divine mandate, saw Thalor's actions as a threat to the stability of his reign. Yet the prince, undeterred by his father's command, continued his research in secret. His defiance led him to a hidden chamber beneath the Grand Sanctum, a place untouched by human hands for centuries. Within this chamber, Thalor discovered a cryptic scroll written in an unknown language, its script so flowing like shadows on parchment. The scroll, though largely indecipherable, contained a chilling warning. It spoke of a great shadow that would consume the land if the Erdtree's secrets were disturbed. Thalor, unable to fully translate the text, shared the scroll with High Priestess Ilara, hoping her knowledge of ancient languages might shed light on its meaning. Ilara, after days of study, interpreted the scroll as a prophecy of doom, a dire prediction that the kingdom's meddling with the Erdtree's mysteries would unleash catastrophe. Her interpretation only deepened the divide between Thaler and his father, setting the stage for a conflict that would shape the kingdom's future. As the Age of Kings unfolded, the tension between faith and knowledge, through tradition and curiosity, began to simmer beneath the surface. The Erdtree, once a symbol of unity, became a source of division, its mysteries casting long shadows over the kingdom. King Aldrich I's unwavering devotion to the shadow in the Erdtree stood in stark contrast to Prince Thaler's relentless pursuit of truth, a clash of ideologies that would define this era. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would determine the fate of the kingdom and the Erdtree itself. The Grand Sanctum, with its towering spires and golden halls, stood as a testament to Aldrich I's vision of a kingdom united under divine guidance. Yet beneath its sacred floors, secrets lay buried, waiting to be uncovered. The shadow, now worshipped as a harbinger of fate, remained an enigma, its true nature shrouded in mystery. Celestia's scrolls and Thaler's discoveries hinted at a deeper truth, one that threatened to unravel the kingdom's carefully constructed narrative. High Priestess Ilara, torn between her loyalty to the king and her growing understanding of the shadow's potential danger, found herself at the center of this unfolding drama. Her visions, once a source of divine inspiration, now carried a weight of uncertainty as she grappled with the implications of the cryptic scroll. The cult of the shadow, once a unifying force, began to fracture, its followers divided by conflicting interpretations of the prophecy. Prince Thalor, driven by a sense of duty to his people, continued his investigation, determined to uncover the truth despite the risks. His defiance of his father's decree marked a turning point in the Age of Kings, as the pursuit of knowledge challenged the sanctity of tradition. The hidden chamber beneath the Grand Sanctum, with its ancient carvings and cryptic scroll, became a symbol of the kingdom's unresolved mysteries, a reminder that the past held secrets that could shape the future. As the Age of Kings progressed, the kingdom stood at a crossroads, its destiny intertwined with the Erdtree and the shadow that watched over it. The events of this era, from Aldrich I's coronation to Thalor's discoveries, laid the foundation for the conflicts and revelations that would follow. The Erdtree, with its golden leaves and towering presence, remained a symbol of divinity, but its roots ran deep, holding secrets that would challenge the very fabric of the kingdom's belief. The Age of Kings was a time of faith and doubt, unity and division, a chapter in the history of the Erdtree that would echo through the ages. As whispers of King Aldrich I's mysterious death still lingered in the halls of the Erdtree's grand cathedral, Thalor's ascension to the throne marked a turning point for the kingdom. Now crowned as King Thaler I, the new monarch wasted no time in asserting his devotion to the Shadow, an enigmatic entity whose presence had long been woven into the fabric of their faith. Within months of his coronation, he commissioned the construction of the Shadow's altar, a towering obsidian monument erected at the heart of the capital, its jagged spires reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. The altar was inscribed with ancient runes, their meanings known only to the high clergy, and it quickly became the focal point of royal ceremonies. Yet even as the kingdom celebrated its new king's piety, the shadow itself seemed to respond, its presence growing darker, its influence more palpable. The once gentle twilight that bathed the land now stretched longer, deeper, as if the sun itself hesitated to rise. Shadows pooled unnaturally in corners, clinging to walls like spilled ink, and the people began to murmur of an unease they couldn't name. It was High Priestess Ilara who first gave voice to their fears. A woman of unwavering conviction, she stood before the royal court and declared that the shadow had spoken to her in a dream, its voice a chorus of whispers woven through the dark. The message was dire. A calamity loomed on the horizon, one that would test the kingdom's faith to its breaking point. Some among the nobility dismissed her as an alarmist, but others noted how the land itself seemed to wither in response to her words. Crops that had flourished for generations now bore stunted, blighted fruit. Livestock grew listless, their eyes clouded as if staring into some unseen horror. The people turned to their king for guidance, and Thalor, ever the pragmatist, sought answers not in prayer alone, but in the forgotten knowledge buried beneath the Erdtree's roots. Beneath the great tree's gnarled boughs, in chambers sealed for centuries, lay a trove of cryptic scrolls, relics from an age when the shadow's nature was still a mystery, even to its most devout followers. Thaler commanded his scholars to decipher them, offering lavish rewards for any who could unravel their secrets. Among those scholars was a young historian named Kale, whose keen mind and unshakable curiosity led him to a chilling discovery. The scrolls spoke not just of worship, but of communion, a ritual that would allow a chosen vessel to step into the shadow's embrace and glimpse the threads of fate. When Kale presented his findings to the king, Thalor did not hesitate. He ordered the ritual prepared at once, dismissing the warnings of his advisors. The ceremony was held at the newly completed Shadow's altar under a moonless sky, with only the high clergy and a handful of trusted knights in attendance. What transpired that night would haunt the kingdom for generations. As the ritual's incantations echoed through the silent courtyard, the air grew thick, the very light bending unnaturally around the king. Witnesses later claimed that Thaler's shadow stretched, twisted, and then, for a single, impossible moment, stood apart from him entirely. When the king at last emerged from his trance, his face was ashen, his hands trembling. He spoke of visions, the Erdtree, its golden leaves blackened and falling like ash, the land swallowed by an endless night, the people, their faces hollowed by despair. Yet rather than recoil from this grim prophecy, Thaler declared it a test of faith. The shadow, he proclaimed, had shown him these horrors not as inevitabilities, but as warnings, challenges to be overcome through unwavering devotion. The kingdom must stand firm, he insisted, and prove itself worthy of the shadow's favor. But not all were convinced. High Priestess Ilara, her faith unshaken, but her interpretation of the visions starkly different, publicly accused the king of hubris. By disturbing the Erdtree's secrets, by daring to pry into the shadow's will, Thaler had invited its wrath. The blighted crops, the dying livestock, the lengthening nights, these were not tests, but punishments. Her words sparked outrage among the royal court, where loyalty to the crown was paramount. Thaler, his authority challenged, had no choice but to act. Declaring Ilara a heretic, he stripped her of her title and banished her from the kingdom under penalty of death. Yet the people's faith in their king was no longer absolute. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some claimed Ilara had been the shadow's true voice, cast out for speaking uncomfortable truths. Others feared the king himself had been corrupted by the ritual, his mind fractured by what he had seen. Ilara did not vanish quietly into exile. With a small band of loyal followers, disillusioned clerics, frightened peasants, even a few sympathetic scholars, she fled to the Whispering Woods, a dense forest rumored to be alive with the voices of the dead. There, hidden among the ancient trees, she established a sanctuary, a place where those who doubted the king's vision could seek refuge. The woods themselves seemed to protect her, their shifting paths confounding would-be pursuers. Stories began to circulate of miracles among her followers, wounds that healed overnight, prophecies spoken in tongues no mortal should know. The shadow, it seemed, had not abandoned Ilara, and if it still spoke to her, what did that mean for Thaler's claim to divine favor? Back in the capital, the king's health began a slow, inexorable decline. His once commanding presence withered. His eyes, once sharp with conviction, grew sunken and distant. Court physicians could find no physical malady to explain his deterioration, but the rumors were relentless. Some said the shadow was draining his life force as punishment for his arrogance. Others whispered that the ritual had left a piece of his soul trapped in the dark, and what remained was slowly unraveling. Thaler himself dismissed such talk, insisting his fatigue was merely the weight of kingship. Yet even his most ardent supporters could not ignore the changes. The kingdom stood at a precipice, its ruler weakening, its people divided, and the shadow's presence growing ever heavier upon the land. The question hung in the air like a storm yet to break. Had Thalor's visions been a warning to heed, or a future already set in motion? And as the king's strength faded, who would stand against the darkness when it finally came? As Prince Aldrich II assumed more of his father's royal duties, the weight of the crown began to settle upon him far sooner than anticipated. Thalabibmir's, once a towering figure of strength, now moved through the halls of the Erdtree Palace with a quiet frailty, his once vibrant golden sigils dimming like embers in the wind. It was during this period of transition, around the year 3000 BCE, that Aldrich uncovered a hidden compartment within his father's private chambers. There, tucked beneath a loose stone in the hearth, lay a journal bound in blackened leather, its pages filled with Thalor's trembling script. The entries spoke of visions, of a presence lurking beyond the Erdtree's light, a force the king called only the Shadow. What Aldrich read would redefine his understanding of their kingdom's fragile peace. Thalor's writings described not just a creeping darkness, but a sentient will behind it, one that whispered to him in dreams. The shadow, his father believed, was no mere absence of light. It was a primordial entity, older than the Erdtree itself, seeking to reclaim what had been taken from it. The roots drink deep of stolen power, one passage read, and the debtor comes at last to collect. These words struck Aldrich with a cold clarity. The Erdtree, the sacred heart of their civilization, was not merely a gift from the gods. It was a prize wrested from the dark, and the shadow would not be denied forever. When Thaler Firmer finally passed, his death was as quiet as his reign had been illustrious. The royal physicians spoke of a wasting sickness, but those who had seen the king in his final days knew the truth. His eyes, once the color of sunlight through leaves, had turned the dull gray of storm clouds. As Aldrich II took the throne, he carried with him not just the crown, but the dread knowledge of his father's warnings. Determined to act where Thalor had hesitated, the new king turned his attention to the Shadow's altar, a monolithic structure hidden deep within the Wraithwood. For generations, it had been a site of forbidden rites, where the kingdom's outcasts whispered to forces beyond the Erdtree's grace. Aldrich saw it as a festering wound, a conduit for the Shadow's influence. His decree was absolute. The altar would be shattered, its stones scattered to the winds. The destruction was swift, but the Shadow's retaliation was swifter. As the last of the altar's obsidian pillars fell, the sky above the Erdtree darkened, not with clouds, but with an unnatural void that swallowed the sun whole. The kingdom was plunged into an unending night, a darkness so thick it choked the very air. Crops withered in the fields, lanterns flickered and died, and the people whispered of shapes moving just beyond the edge of sight. It was in this perpetual twilight that High Priestess Ilara returned, her robes tattered, her eyes alight with a fervor that bordered on madness. She spoke not as a supplicant, but as a herald. The shadow, she declared, would no longer be ignored. The Erdtree had tipped the balance of the world, and only its destruction could restore harmony. Aldrich's refusal was immediate, his voice ringing through the darkened halls of the palace. The Erdtree was not merely a symbol, it was the soul of their kingdom, the source of the golden blessings that had sustained them for centuries. To surrender it would be to surrender their very identity. But even as he spoke, the shadow's grip tightened. Tendrils of darkness coiled around the Erdtree's trunk, climbing higher with each passing hour until its golden boughs were swallowed by an inky shroud. The tree still stood, but its light was gone, leaving the land in a twilight that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Then, without warning, Aldrich II vanished. His chambers were found empty, the crown left upon his pillow, as if placed there with deliberate care. The only clue was a scroll, its edges charred as though it had been plucked from a fire. The words within were sparse, written in a hand that shook with urgency. The shadow's final act approaches. When the last leaf falls, the Erdtree will follow, and the age of light will end in chaos. The kingdom waited, breathless, for what would come next. But the shadow did not strike, not yet. Instead, it lingered, a patient hunter savoring the moment before the kill. The age of kings, defined by its golden triumphs and slow unraveling, was over. What remained was a land suspended between light and dark, its people clinging to the hope that the Erdtree might yet awaken. But as the days stretched into months, and the darkness showed no sign of receding, even the most devout began to wonder, had the shadow already won? In the silence that followed, the whispers began anew. Some spoke of Aldrich's fate, theorizing that he had ventured into the shadow's heart to bargain for his people's survival. Others claimed he had been taken, his body and soul claimed as tribute. But the most chilling theory came from the few who still dared to study the old texts. They pointed to a prophecy, one that spoke of a king who would walk willingly into the dark, only to return as something else entirely. Whether Aldrich's disappearance was an end or a beginning, none could say. But as the shadow's presence thickened, pressing down upon the land like a smothering hand, one truth became inescapable. The Erdtree's fate, and the fate of all who depended upon it, now hung by the thinnest of threads. The kingdom's scholars would later call this period the Reckoning Silence, a time when the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The shadow had shown its strength, but it had not yet delivered the final blow. Why? The answer, perhaps, lay in the nature of the Erdtree itself. For all its power, the great tree was not invincible. It was a living thing, and like all living things, it could be starved. The shadow's shroud had cut it off from the sun, from the prayers of the faithful, from the very essence it needed to survive. The Erdtree was dying, and with it, the light that had defined an age. And yet, in the farthest reaches of the kingdom, rumors persisted of a resistance. A scattered few, led by figures whose names had been struck from the royal records, whispered of a way to strike back. They spoke of the Ember Heart, a relic said to hold the last spark of the Erdtree's primordial fire. If it could be found, if it could be reignited, perhaps the shadow's advance could be slowed. But these were the desperate hopes of a people on the brink, and time was running out. As the Age of Kings faded into memory, the land stood at the precipice of a new era, one that would be defined not by crowns and covenants, but by the choices of those who refused to let the light die. The shadow had made its move. Now the world would answer. Narration for the Era of Forgotten Scholars, Part 1 of 3. As the centuries turned and the world moved beyond the age of myth, a new chapter in the shadowed history of the Erdtree began to unfold. Around 500 years before the Common Era, in the classical period of the lands between, a quiet but profound shift occurred in the city of Luminara. Here, far from the grand battles and divine conflicts of earlier eras, a different kind of struggle took root, one of knowledge, secrecy, and the relentless pursuit of truths best left buried. This was the dawn of the Order of the Veiled Eye, a clandestine society of scholars whose discoveries would ripple across the ages, even as their names faded into obscurity. Luminara, known then as the City of Illuminated Minds, was a haven for philosophers and historians, its marble halls filled with the murmur of debate and the rustle of parchment. Yet beneath this veneer of scholarly pursuit, a darker current flowed. The Order of the Veiled Eye was founded in the hidden chambers beneath the city's great library, its members bound by a singular purpose: to uncover the secrets of the Erdtree and the enigmatic shadow it cast. At its helm stood archivist Thalor, a figure of towering intellect and unshakable conviction. Thalor, once a revered historian of the city's elite, had grown disillusioned with the sanctioned narratives of the Erdtree's divinity. To him, the tree was not merely a symbol of grace, it was a puzzle, its shadow a cipher waiting to be decoded. The Order's first breakthrough came not from Luminara's own archives, but from the ruins of Eldaris, a forgotten city swallowed by time and the encroaching wilds. Eldaris, once a thriving hub of an ancient civilization, had been reduced to little more than crumbling pillars and dust-choked corridors. Yet within its ruins, the scholars discovered a trove of scrolls, their vellum brittle with age but their ink still legible. These texts spoke of a people who had worshipped the Erdtree not as a passive symbol, but as a living, breathing entity, a deity with its own will and whispers. The scrolls hinted at rituals long abandoned, at offerings made not to the tree's golden boughs, but to the darkness beneath them. It was Scholar Elysia, a prodigy of linguistic archaeology, who first deciphered the most troubling fragment. Amidst the usual hymns and prayers, she found a passage that spoke of the Erdtree's shadow as a vessel, not merely an absence of light, but a presence in its own right. The text described it as the slumbering hand of the unseen, a phrase that sent a chill through the Order's ranks. Elysia, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed it as poetic metaphor, but as the weeks passed, the words gnawed at her. What if the shadow was not just a consequence of the Erdtree's light, but something else? Driven by this revelation, the Order began conducting nocturnal rituals in the depths of Luminara's catacombs, far from prying eyes. They sought to commune with the shadow, to draw forth its secrets, as one might coax a confession from a reluctant witness. The ceremonies were elaborate, involving mirrors of polished obsidian, incense distilled from rare herbs, and chants reconstructed from the Eldaris scrolls. At first, the results were intangible, a faint coolness in the air, a sense of being watched. But soon, the whispers began. Scholars reported hearing voices in the dark, not in any language they could recognize, yet somehow understood. The words were fragmented, maddeningly just out of reach, but their tone was unmistakable. Hunger, unease spread through the Order like a slow poison. A rift formed between those who believed the whispers were a bridge to forgotten knowledge and those who feared they were the first signs of something waking. Scholar Kalis, a staunch rationalist, argued that the rituals were inviting forces beyond their comprehension. "We are scholars, not priests," he warned. "To treat the shadow as an oracle is to abandon reason for superstition." But Thalor, ever the visionary, saw only opportunity. To him, the whispers were proof. The shadow was alive, and it had answers. The tension might have remained academic were it not for Kalis's next discovery. While mapping the subterranean passages beneath the Erdtree itself, he stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its walls covered in inscriptions far older than those of Eldaris. The script was archaic, its symbols resembling the earliest forms of the Golden Order's language, yet twisted as if written by a hand that knew the words, but not their intent. The message was clear. "Beware the Great Awakening." The inscription spoke of a time when the shadow would uncoil, when its influence would seep into the world like ink into water. Most chilling of all was the repeated mention of a herald, a figure who would herald this awakening, though whether as a savior or a destroyer, the text did not say. Calus returned to Luminara with his findings, expecting debate. Instead, he found the city's ruling council waiting. The Order's experiments had not gone unnoticed. Rumors of strange lights in the catacombs, of scholars speaking in tongues, had reached the Council's ears. They demanded the Order cease its activities immediately, citing the risk of societal unrest. The shadow, they declared, was not a subject for study, but a warning, one their ancestors had heeded for good reason. Publicly, Thaler acquiesced. Privately, he doubled his efforts. The archivist had seen something in the whispers, something that transcended the council's petty fears. He began working in secret, aided by a handful of loyalists, including Alicia. But even she was beginning to falter. The nightmares started subtly, a fleeting image of the Erdtree's leaves turning black, a sensation of roots tightening around her throat. And then came the visions. The Erdtree, not radiant, but rotting, its bark peeling away to reveal something pulsing beneath. She woke each night with the same phrase echoing in her mind, a phrase not from any scroll, but from the whispers themselves. He is coming. What began as a scholarly pursuit had become a descent into something far darker. The Order of the Veiled Eye stood at a precipice, their discoveries pulling them toward truths that threatened to unravel not just their understanding of the Erdtree, but the very fabric of their world. And as the first cracks in their sanity began to show, the shadow watched and waited. As the Order of Luminara continued their rituals, the shadow of the Erdtree began to manifest a faint, pulsating glow, observed for the first time during a ceremonial gathering in the year 500 BCE. This phenomenon, unlike anything recorded before, was initially dismissed as a trick of the light or a hallucination induced by the incense used in the rituals. However, as the glow persisted and even intensified during subsequent ceremonies, it became impossible to ignore. Scholars began to speculate that the shadow was reacting to their attempts to understand it, as if it were alive and aware of their presence. This marked a turning point in their studies, shifting from passive observation to the unsettling realization that they might be engaging with something far more sentient than they had anticipated. It was during this period of heightened activity that a scholar named Virel succumbed to madness. Virel, once a meticulous and respected member of the Order, began to exhibit erratic behavior, claiming that the shadow had spoken to him directly. His accounts were fragmented and incoherent, filled with references to the voice beneath the roots and the whispers of the void. While some dismissed his claims as the ravings of a disturbed mind, others within the Order grew uneasy, fearing that Virel's descent into madness might be the result of prolonged exposure to the shadow's influence. His eventual disappearance only deepened the mystery, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a growing sense of dread among his peers. Around the same time, the Order made a significant discovery, a map leading to the so-called Heart of the Shadow in the Whispering Woods. The map, found among the archives of Luminara, was cryptic and incomplete, but it hinted at a location where the shadow's power might be concentrated. The Whispering Woods, a dense and foreboding forest on the outskirts of Luminara, had long been shrouded in myth and superstition. Local legends spoke of strange lights and disembodied voices emanating from its depths. But until now, these tales had been dismissed as mere folklore. The map, however, suggested that there might be truth to these stories, and that the heart of the shadow could be the key to unlocking the mysteries of the Erdtree. Driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, a group of scholars ventured into the Whispering Woods, determined to uncover the truth. The expedition was led by scholar Calus, a man known for his unwavering resolve and keen intellect. Despite warnings from the more cautious members of the order, Calus and his team pressed on, armed with the map and a belief that they were on the brink of a monumental discovery. Tragically, they were never seen again. Weeks turned into months, and as hope for their return dwindled, whispers of their fate began to circulate. Some claimed to have heard their voices echoing through the woods, while others spoke of strange markings carved into trees near the edge of the forest. The disappearance of Calus and his team cast a long shadow over the order, leaving behind a legacy of fear and uncertainty. In the wake of the expedition's failure, the remaining scholars found their sanity slipping. Paranoia spread through the halls of Luminara as rumors of unseen forces and malevolent entities took root. Scholars who had once been steadfast in their pursuit of knowledge now avoided the archives, fearing what they might uncover. The shadow's influence seemed to grow stronger. Its presence felt even in the most mundane aspects of daily life. Sleep became elusive, plagued by nightmares of endless voids and whispering voices. The once vibrant community of scholars began to unravel, their unity fractured by suspicion and fear. Amid this growing chaos, archivist Thaler emerged as a voice of reason. A meticulous and methodical man, Thaler dedicated himself to deciphering a prophecy that had been discovered among the Order's oldest texts. The prophecy, written in a language long thought extinct, spoke of the Shadow's awakening and the catastrophic consequences that would follow. Thaler's translation revealed chilling details. The Shadow was not merely a passive entity, but a dormant force waiting to be unleashed. The prophecy warned of the trembling of the earth and the fall of the light, suggesting that the Shadow's awakening would bring about widespread destruction. Thaler's findings were met with a mix of awe and terror as the scholars realized that their efforts to understand the Shadow might have inadvertently hastened its return. The tension within the Order reached a breaking point when their headquarters in Luminara was struck by a mysterious fire. The blaze, which erupted in the dead of night, consumed much of the archives, destroying centuries of research and irreplaceable artifacts. While the cause of the fire was never determined, many suspected that it was no accident. Some believed it was the work of an external force, perhaps agents of the ruling council who had grown wary of the Order's activities. Others whispered that the Shadow itself had orchestrated the destruction, erasing the knowledge that threatened to expose its true nature. Whatever the cause, the fire marked a devastating blow to the Order, leaving them with little more than fragments of their once great legacy. In the aftermath of the fire, Scholar Calus vanished under mysterious circumstances. His disappearance was discovered when his journal was found abandoned in the ruins of the archives. The journal, filled with cryptic entries and frantic scribbles, detailed Calus's descent into madness. He wrote of hearing voices that grew louder with each passing day, urging him to uncover secrets that were better left buried. His final entry spoke of a gateway hidden within the Whispering Woods, a place where the Shadow's power was strongest. Calus's disappearance, coupled with the contents of his journal, deepened the sense of unease that had taken hold of the Order. It was as if the Shadow was closing in, its influence spreading like a plague. Around this time, the Shadow began to emit a low hum, audible only to those who had participated in the rituals. This hum, described as both soothing and unnerving, seemed to resonate within the minds of those who heard it. Some scholars claimed that it carried fragments of knowledge, fleeting glimpses of truths that were otherwise inaccessible. Others, however, reported feelings of dread and disorientation, as if the hum were a harbinger of something far more sinister. The phenomenon divided the Order, with some seeing it as a sign of progress and others as a warning to cease their studies. The hum became a constant presence, a reminder of the shadow's growing power. As the Order's internal strife intensified, the ruling council of Luminara took decisive action. Declaring the Order a threat to public safety, they ordered its immediate dissolution. The council's decision was met with outrage and disbelief, as the scholars argued that their work was essential to understanding the shadow and preventing its awakening. Archivist Thalor, now one of the Order's few remaining leaders, was arrested during a raid on the archives. His arrest was seen as a symbolic gesture, a message from the Council that the pursuit of forbidden knowledge would no longer be tolerated. Thalor's final words, uttered as he was led away, hinted at a greater truth yet to be uncovered. "The shadow is not what we think," he said, his voice trembling with conviction. "It is older than the Erdtree, older than the world itself." With the Order disbanded and its members scattered, the scholars took fragments of their findings with them, determined to preserve their knowledge despite the Council's efforts to erase it. Among these scholars was Lyra, a young and resourceful archivist who had managed to salvage a cache of scrolls from the ruins of the archives. Fearing that the Council would seize the scrolls, Lyra fled Luminara, journeying to the remote Frost Peak Mountains. There, in a hidden cave, known only to her, she concealed the scrolls, hoping that they would one day be found by those who could continue the Order's work. Lyra's actions, though desperate, ensured that the knowledge of the shadow would not be lost entirely. As the Order's remnants dispersed, the shadow's phenomena intensified, causing tremors in Luminara and the surrounding regions. These tremors, initially dismissed as natural occurrences, grew in frequency and strength, shaking the foundations of buildings and sending fissures through the earth. The people of Luminara, already on edge from the Order's dissolution, now faced a new and terrifying threat. The tremors were accompanied by strange phenomena, lights flickering in the sky, whispers carried on the wind, and a pervasive sense of unease that seemed to seep into every corner of the city. It was as if the shadow, no longer restrained by the Order's rituals, was beginning to awaken. The era of forgotten scholars, marked by discovery and despair, had come to a tumultuous end. The shadow of the Erdtree, once a distant mystery, had become an undeniable force, its influence spreading far beyond the confines of Luminara. The scholars who had sought to understand it were now scattered, their work undone by fear and fire. Yet as the tremors grew stronger and the whispers louder, it became clear that the shadow's awakening was not a matter of if, but when. The world stood on the brink of a new era, one that would be defined by the shadow's rise and the desperate struggle to contain it. And so the ruling council of Luminara made their fateful decree. By the year 500 BCE, the Erdtree's vicinity was declared forbidden ground, its perimeter sealed with silver wards and guarded by the newly formed sentinels of the Veil. These enforcers, clad in armor inscribed with silencing runes, were tasked with ensuring no further research could be conducted on the shadow's phenomena. The Council's proclamation cited the preservation of mortal sanity as their justification, though surviving fragments of private correspondence reveal a more pragmatic fear. The shadow's whispers had begun infiltrating the dreams of those who governed. Yet prohibition seldom extinguishes curiosity. Among the disbanded Order of the Unseen Eye, one scholar refused to abandon his life's work. Dravik of the Amber Quill, a junior archivist known for his meticulous studies of the Erdtree's root cycles, continued his observations in secret. Using a network of abandoned aqueducts beneath Luminara's Scholars' Quarter, he accessed the Forbidden Zone for nearly 3 months, documenting the shadow's fluctuations in a coded journal. His final entry, recovered by sentinels after his corpse was found slumped against the Erdtree's northwestern buttress, contained a single legible phrase. "It isn't a shadow at all. The remainder had been clawed away, the parchment beneath stained with a substance later confirmed to be Dravik's own vitreous humor. The Council's response was swift and systematic. Under the directive of High Arbiter Valus, all findings from the Order of the Unseen Eye were gathered, not destroyed as some expected, but transported to the Vault of Silence, a subterranean complex beneath Luminara's central basilica. This repository, lined with blackstone from the Frost Peak Mountains, had been designed to contain that which corrodes memory itself. The vault's locking mechanism, known as the Seal of the Unspoken, required the blood of 3 council members and could only be broken by their combined lineage, a safeguard against impulsive revelation. Among the artifacts interred were Dravik's journal, the original Frost Peak cave etchings, and the infamous Mirror of Motes, a silver glass said to reflect the shadow's true form, though none dared verify this claim. It was during these operations that the shadow's hum, the constant low-frequency resonance that had permeated Luminara for decades, ceased without warning. Witnesses described the silence as not an absence, but a swallowing, as if the air itself had been drained of vibration. The Erdtree's usual golden radiance seemed duller in the ensuing days, though whether this was objective or a trick of collective unease remains debated. What is certain is that the Council seized the opportunity to redouble their efforts at erasure. The Order of the Unseen Eye was branded heretical, its members posthumously excommunicated, and all public records of their existence were purged from Luminara's archives. The term Unseen Eye itself was outlawed, replaced in censored documents by the euphemism, the misguided luminaries. Yet history has a way of preserving what authority tries to obliterate. Within a year of the purge, a rumor began circulating in Luminara's lower wards. A single scholar had survived the Order's dissolution. Identified only as the witness of the last page, this figure was said to have fled the city with a fragment of Dravik's final research. According to Tavern Whispers, the witness claimed to have glimpsed the shadow's true nature in the Mirror of Motes moments before its confiscation, and what they saw left them neither blind nor sighted, but something in between. No reliable accounts confirm the witness's fate, though a fragmentary ballad from the period describes a figure wandering the Frost Peak foothills, their eyes 2 voids where the Erdtree's light could not catch. As the decades passed, the shadow's manifestations grew undeniably fainter. Where once its silhouette had cast entire districts into twilight, now it scarcely darkened the Erdtree's own bark. The phenomena associated with it, the whispering winds, the gravity distortions near its edges, diminished to near imperceptibility. Luminara, ever resilient, turned its attention to reconstruction. The Sentinels of the Veil were repurposed as a civic guard, their silencing runes replaced with heraldic crests. The Scholars' Quarter, once the Order's hub, was rebuilt as a center for astrological study, its new occupants blissfully unaware of the Blackstone Vault beneath their observatory's foundations. But some secrets refused to stay buried. Centuries after the era of forgotten scholars, a landslide in the Frost Peak Mountains exposed the original cave where the shadow was first documented. Explorers found the etchings still intact, though their meaning had been lost to time. More troublingly, they reported a residue in the cavern's deepest chamber, a substance that absorbed light without reflecting it, much like the descriptions of the shadow itself. Attempts to collect samples failed. The material dissipated upon contact with living flesh. By the time scholars arrived to investigate, another avalanche had sealed the cave once more, and the mountain's ever-shifting glaciers ensured its location could not be reliably mapped. The Vault of Silence, meanwhile, remained impregnable. The lineages of the 3 council members who sealed it had by this point diverged across the continent, and no concerted effort was made to reunite their bloodlines. Periodic attempts to breach the vault magically were met with grotesque consequences. One would-be thief emerged with his vocal cords fused together, another aged to dust the moment she crossed the threshold. The vault's wards, it seemed, had been designed to adapt to intruders, their protections growing more severe with each passing century. The shadow's final recorded manifestation occurred in the waning years of the era. A traveling monk named Elthar the Unflinching claimed to have seen the Erdtree's shadow solidify for a single heartbeat into the image of a withered husk, its branches skeletal, its trunk cracked and oozing a black sap that fell upward into the sky. Elthar's account was dismissed as delirium, but the timing coincided with a verified anomaly. Every silver ward surrounding the Erdtree shattered simultaneously, though no force was detected. Within a year, the shadow had faded entirely, leaving no physical trace of its centuries-long presence. And so, the era of forgotten scholars drew to a close not with revelation, but with silence. The mystery of the Erdtree's shadow persisted, though its urgency dimmed with each generation. Luminara thrived, its people content to attribute the past to metaphor or madness. Yet in rare moments, when the wind stilled and the Erdtree's light caught the edge of a cloud just so, those who listened closely swore they could hear a sound like pages turning in a distant vault or the faintest echo of a hum that had once shaken the world. As the era of forgotten scholars faded into obscurity, the mysteries of the Erdtree's shadow endured, untouched by time and unyielding to explanation. By the modern era, the shadow had become an enigma that transcended its ancient origins, a phenomenon that defied both natural law and scholarly consensus. In the present day, the shadow persists, casting its eerie silhouette across the land, a constant reminder of the unanswered questions that have haunted humanity for millennia. Modern scholars, armed with advanced technology and centuries of accumulated knowledge, continue to grapple with the shadow's true nature, yet it remains as elusive as ever. The debate over the shadow's origin has become a central focus of contemporary academia. Some argue that it is a natural phenomenon, a quirk of light and geography that has been misinterpreted as something more profound. Others, however, insist that the shadow is a remnant of ancient magic, a relic from a time when the Erdtree itself was a source of immense power. This division has only deepened as new discoveries emerge, each one adding another layer of complexity to the mystery. Among the most prominent figures in this modern investigation is Dr. Alara Voss, a renowned archaeologist whose work has shed new light on the shadow's enigmatic presence. Dr. Voss's journey began with an excavation near the Erdtree's base, where she and her team uncovered ruins that had lain buried for centuries. These ruins, believed to date back to the earliest days of recorded history, contained carvings and inscriptions that hinted at a deeper connection between the Erdtree and its shadow. The carvings depicted figures kneeling before the shadow, offering it gifts and prayers, suggesting that it had been revered as something sacred long before the rise of modern civilization. This discovery sparked a wave of interest in the shadow, drawing attention from scholars, historians, and even fringe groups who saw it as a source of spiritual significance. One such group, known as the Children of the Shadow, emerged in the wake of Dr. Voss's findings. This small but fervent sect viewed the Erdtree's shadow as a divine entity, a manifestation of a higher power that had been forgotten by the world. They claimed that the shadow held the key to enlightenment, a gateway to a realm beyond human understanding. While their beliefs were dismissed by many as delusional, their presence added a new dimension to the ongoing debate, forcing scholars to consider the possibility that the shadow might hold a deeper, more profound meaning. As Dr. Voss continued her excavations, she made a discovery that would change the course of her research forever. Deep within the ruins, she uncovered a chamber filled with artifacts, unlike anything she had ever seen. These artifacts, intricately carved and inscribed with an unknown language, suggested the existence of a forgotten civilization that had once thrived in the shadow of the Erdtree. The inscriptions spoke of the shadow as a gateway, a passage to another world or dimension, and hinted at rituals and ceremonies that had been performed to honor it. This revelation was a turning point, not only for Dr. Voss, but for the entire field of archaeology, as it provided the first tangible evidence of a culture that had revered the shadow long before recorded history. The discovery of these artifacts coincided with a series of strange and inexplicable events that began to occur around the Erdtree. Reports surfaced of people experiencing vivid visions when standing in the shadow at dawn, moments of clarity and insight that seemed to transcend ordinary perception. These shadow visions, as they came to be known, became a subject of intense study, with neurologists and psychologists attempting to explain them through scientific means. Yet, despite their efforts, no rational explanation could be found. The visions remained a mystery, a phenomenon that defied understanding and fueled the growing fascination with the shadow. Explorer Kyle Renrake, known for his daring expeditions and meticulous mapping skills, took it upon himself to chart the shadow's movements. What he discovered was both fascinating and perplexing. Unlike ordinary shadows, which follow predictable patterns based on the position of the sun, the Erdtree's shadow moved in ways that defied natural laws. It would shift and warp, sometimes appearing in places where it shouldn't be, or vanishing entirely for brief moments. Renrick's findings added another layer of complexity to the mystery, suggesting that the shadow was not merely a passive phenomenon, but an active, dynamic force. The shadow's strangest behavior occurred during a rare celestial event, when the alignment of the sun, moon, and stars caused it to temporarily vanish. This event, witnessed by thousands, sparked global attention and reignited the debate over the shadow's nature. The children of the shadow seized upon this moment, declaring it a sign of an impending awakening, a time when the shadow would reveal its true purpose and guide humanity to a new era of enlightenment. While their claims were met with skepticism, the event itself was undeniable, a moment that left even the most hardened skeptics questioning their understanding of the world. Dr. Voss, undeterred by the growing speculation and sensationalism, continued her work in the ruins. Her persistence paid off when she uncovered a buried chamber containing artifacts inscribed with an unknown language. These artifacts, meticulously preserved despite the passage of time, provided a glimpse into a civilization that had once thrived in the shadow of the Erdtree. The inscriptions, though initially indecipherable, were eventually translated by linguist Professor Heron Delmeyer, who identified the language as a precursor to all known ancient tongues. This revelation was groundbreaking, as suggesting that the civilization that had revered the shadow predated all others, a forgotten culture that had laid the foundation for human history. The artifacts themselves offered tantalizing clues about the shadow's significance. They depicted it as a gateway, a passage to another realm or dimension, and spoke of rituals and ceremonies performed to honor it. These findings aligned with the earlier carvings discovered by Dr. Voss, reinforcing the idea that the shadow had been revered as something sacred long before the rise of modern civilization. The implications were profound, suggesting that the shadow was not merely a physical phenomenon, but a metaphysical one, a bridge between worlds that had been forgotten by time. As the mystery deepened, a team of physicists, led by Dr. Lin May, turned their attention to the shadow's light absorption properties. Using advanced technology, they attempted to analyze how the shadow interacted with light, hoping to uncover clues about its nature. What they discovered was both fascinating and baffling. The shadow absorbed light in ways that defied conventional physics, creating patterns and anomalies that could not be explained by existing theories. Dr. May's findings added another layer of complexity to the mystery, suggesting that the shadow was not merely a passive phenomenon, but an active, dynamic force that interacted with the world in ways that defied understanding. The modern era has brought us closer to understanding the Erdtree's shadow, yet it remains as enigmatic as ever. Each discovery, each revelation, only deepens the mystery, adding new layers of complexity to a phenomenon that has fascinated humanity for millennia. As Dr. Voss and her colleagues continue their work, they do so with the knowledge that they are unraveling a mystery that transcends time and space, a puzzle that may hold the key to understanding not only the shadow, but the very nature of existence itself. The Erdtree's shadow is more than just a physical phenomenon. It is a gateway to the unknown, a reminder that there are still mysteries in the world that defy explanation and challenge our understanding of reality. The investigation into the shadow's anomalies took a darker turn when Kyle Renrick, a freelance researcher and amateur astronomer, vanished without a trace during a solo camping expedition near the shadow's periphery. Renrick had been documenting unusual electromagnetic fluctuations in the area, convinced the phenomenon was tied to lunar cycles. His last transmission, sent to a colleague at the University of Lorath, described a ripple in the air near the Erdtree's base, followed by static. Search teams found his tent intact, equipment still running, but no sign of Renrick himself. The absence of footprints or disturbance in the surrounding soil baffled authorities, fueling speculation about the shadow's involvement. The Children of the Shadow, a fringe religious group that had been monitoring the Erdtree for decades, seized on Renrick's disappearance as proof of their doctrine. Their leader, a charismatic figure known only as the Veil Speaker, declared Renrick had been taken by the shadow, a sacred transition reserved for those deemed worthy. Overnight, Renrick's name was woven into their liturgy, his journals, recovered and leaked by a sympathetic park ranger, treated as prophetic texts. The group's ranks swelled with new converts, drawn by the promise of transcendence through the shadow's embrace. This fervor did not go unnoticed by the academic community. Dr. Hilaire Voss, an astrophysicist at the Lorath Institute, published a controversial paper positing that the shadow's behavior aligned with cyclical cosmic events, specifically the alignment of the Erdtree with a theoretical dark star mentioned in pre-collapse star charts. Her work, though rigorously mathematical, was met with derision by traditionalists. Chief among her critics was Dr. Torren Feld of the Royal Astrological Society, who dismissed her findings as shadow mysticism, accusing her of conflating folklore with hard science. The ensuing feud polarized scholarly circles, with Feld's camp arguing the shadow was a mundane geological oddity, while Voss's supporters pointed to the growing body of inexplicable data. The debate took an unexpected turn when satellite imagery from the Global Skywatch Initiative revealed the shadow's outline matched a constellation known as the Hollow Crown, referenced in fragmentary star maps from the age of the first tree. Astronomer Yara Selvos, cross-referencing these maps with modern celestial records, made a chilling discovery. The Hollow Crown had not been visible in the night sky for over 12 millennia, its stars presumably extinguished or shifted beyond observable wavelengths. Yet here was its likeness, etched into the ground beneath the Erdtree. Selvos's findings lent credence to Voss's theories, suggesting the shadow was not merely an absence of light, but a reflection of something far older and more deliberate. As academia grappled with these revelations, investigative journalist Miquella infiltrated the Children of the Shadow undercover, posing as a seeker drawn to their teachings. Her exposés, published in the Lorath Herald, peeled back the veil on the group's inner workings. Kell described rituals where members ingested a substance called veil milk, a viscous, iridescent liquid allegedly harvested from the shadow's edges. Participants reported visions of a world beneath the world, where the Erdtree stood inverted, its roots cradling a black sun. Kell's most alarming claim was that the Veil Speaker had begun identifying candidates for ascension, a process ominously reminiscent of Renrick's disappearance. Authorities, pressured by public outcry, raided the group's compound in the foothills of the Greyspire Mountains. Though no illegal substances were found, veil milk, if it existed, had been carefully hidden or destroyed, officers confiscated a trove of handwritten codices, collectively termed the shadow texts. These manuscripts, written in a cipher blending archaic script with astrological notation, referenced a coming Veil Walker, a figure destined to unite shadow and light during an event called the Eclipse of the First Tree. Dr. Voss, collaborating with linguist Professor Heydrich Delmier, managed to decipher a fragment suggesting this eclipse was not merely celestial, but a convergence of realms, a thinning of boundaries between the Erdtree's world and the shadow's origin. The implications of these texts triggered a surge in shadow-related cult activity across the continent. New groups, some splintering from the Children of the Shadow, others emerging independently, began pilgrimages to the Erdtree, convinced the eclipse was imminent. Governments, wary of unrest, imposed surveillance on the site, deploying sensor drones and motion trackers to monitor the shadow's movements. It was during one such routine scan that Dr. Lin May's team at the Lorith Institute detected something extraordinary. Faint pulses of energy emanating from the shadow's core, synchronized with the passing of solar eclipses. These emissions, though minuscule, defied known physics, their waveforms suggesting a form of structured absence, as if the shadow was not merely absorbing light, but transmitting it elsewhere. May's discovery reignited the question of whether the shadow was a passive phenomenon or something with intent. If the Hollow Crown constellation's reappearance was a message, and the eclipse of the first tree a threshold, then what lay beyond it? And who or what was the Veil Walker? The Children of the Shadow had their answer. Kyle Renrick, they claimed, had not been taken. He had been chosen. And as the next solar eclipse drew near, their preparations took on a fevered urgency, their chants echoing the decoded prophecy. When the crown descends, the walker shall rise, and the tree's shadow shall drink the sky. Meanwhile, in the halls of academia, Voss and Feld's feud reached a stalemate, their arguments now overshadowed by the tangible mystery unfolding at the Erdtree. Feld, ever the skeptic, conceded that the shadow's properties were anomalous, but maintained that attributing agency to it was premature. Voss, however, began quietly assembling a team to investigate the Grey Spire Mountains, where local legends spoke of caves that breathed shadow, their walls adorned with murals depicting the Hollow Crown. She theorized these caves might hold physical evidence of prior eclipses, perhaps even clues to the Veil Walker's identity. The public, caught between scientific intrigue and spiritual fervor, watched and waited. The shadow, as ever, remained silent. But as the next eclipse approached, the air around the Erdtree seemed to thicken, the light bending just slightly at the edges, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The viral video of the shadow's distortion, debunked by experts as CGI, nevertheless reignited public fascination with the Erdtree's mysteries. The brief flicker, described by some as resembling a doorway or portal, became a focal point for online theorists. Platforms like Reddit and YouTube exploded with analyses, many pointing to the video's timing, captured during a rare astronomical alignment where the moon and sun framed the shadow at precise angles. While skeptics dismissed it as a hoax, others argued that the alignment itself hinted at something more profound. Professor Delmier, who had been quietly studying the shadow for decades, was one of the few academics to take the video seriously. In his private notes, he speculated that the distortion might be a glimpse into what he called the shadow alphabet, a cryptic system of symbols he believed encoded predictions about future events. Tragically, Delmeyer's sudden death in 2023 left his research incomplete, and his notes were seized by authorities citing national security concerns. His final journal entry, leaked anonymously, contained a chilling warning. The shadow's alphabet foretells a convergence. When the symbols align, the city beneath the tree will awaken. Delmeyer's death marked a turning point in the Erdtree's modern narrative. The Children of the Shadow, a fringe group that had been growing in influence since the early 2000s, interpreted his notes as a prophecy. Their leader, known only as the Harbinger, declared that the Shadow's convergence was imminent, a cosmic event that would herald the return of an ancient civilization buried beneath the Erdtree. The group, already under scrutiny for its alleged ties to extremist ideologies, went underground shortly after Delmeyer's death, releasing cryptic manifestos and encrypted messages that only deepened the mystery. Authorities dismissed their claims as delusional, but leaked documents from ShadowNet, a hacker collective specializing in exposing classified government projects, suggested that the group's theories might not be entirely baseless. Among the files was a reference to Project Duskfall, a Cold War-era initiative that explored the Shadow's potential as a strategic resource. Details were sparse, but the documents hinted at experiments involving electromagnetic fields and attempts to harness the Shadow's energy. The leaks fueled speculation that governments had long known about the Shadow's anomalous properties, but had suppressed the information to avoid public panic. Dr. Voss, once a prominent figure in Erdtree research, found herself increasingly marginalized in the wake of these revelations. Her insistence on pursuing what she called the Shadow's deeper truths led to accusations of promoting pseudoscience. In 2024, her permits for further study were revoked, effectively ending her career. Voss's supporters argued that her dismissal was politically motivated, a way to silence inconvenient questions about the Shadow's nature. In a rare public statement, Voss accused the scientific establishment of willful blindness, claiming that the Erdtree's Shadow held secrets that could redefine humanity's understanding of reality. Her final paper, unpublished but circulated privately among her colleagues, proposed a radical theory. The Shadow was not merely a physical phenomenon, but a dimensional interface, a gateway to a parallel realm. While most scientists dismissed her ideas as speculative, a small group of researchers continued to explore the possibility, often in secret. The metallic fragments discovered in the Erdtree's core samples remained one of the most tantalizing pieces of evidence. Dr. Torin Feld, who led the sanctioned expedition in 2022, published his findings in a peer-reviewed journal, noting that the isotopic ratios of the metals did not match any known elements on Earth. The discovery sparked intense debate within the scientific community. Some argued that the fragments were evidence of extraterrestrial influence, while others suggested they might be remnants of an ancient, advanced civilization. Feld himself was cautious, stating that more research was needed before drawing definitive conclusions. However, his work attracted the attention of military and corporate interests, leading to speculation that the fragments might have practical applications. ShadowNet's leaks hinted at classified projects aimed at replicating the metal's unique properties, though no concrete evidence has surfaced. The UN's designation of the Erdtree as a Site of Universal Heritage in 2021 was intended to protect it from exploitation, but it also had the unintended effect of restricting access to independent researchers. Only government-approved teams were allowed to study the tree and its shadow, leading to accusations of censorship. Critics argued that the designation was less about preservation and more about controlling the narrative surrounding the Erdtree. The Children of the Shadow, in particular, saw it as part of a broader conspiracy to suppress the truth. Their underground networks continued to disseminate information, often blending fact with speculation, and their influence grew despite official efforts to discredit them. The story of the child who claimed to speak with the Shadow's voice in 2020 became a cornerstone of modern Erdtree lore. Psychologists attributed the phenomenon to pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli, but the child's vivid descriptions of a city beneath the tree captured the public's imagination. Online forums dissected every detail, with some theorizing that the child had tapped into a collective, unconscious memory of an ancient civilization. The story spread rapidly, fueled by social media and a growing appetite for mysteries that defied conventional explanations. It also inspired a wave of artistic interpretations, from novels to video games, cementing the Erdtree's shadow as a cultural touchstone. As the 2020s progressed, the Erdtree's shadow remained an enigma, its secrets seemingly buried deeper than modern science could reach. The convergence predicted by Professor Delmeyer in The Children of the Shadow has yet to occur, but the shadow's allure persists. It continues to attract researchers, theorists, and dreamers, each seeking to unravel its mysteries. Whether it is a natural phenomenon, a gateway to another dimension, or something else entirely, the shadow of the Erdtree stands as a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with the unknown. Its story is far from over, and as long as it casts its enigmatic presence over the landscape, it will remain a source of wonder and speculation for generations to come. From the ancient whispers of the Erdtree's origins to the lingering enigmas of the modern age, the timeline of unsolved mysteries weaves a tapestry of intrigue, loss, and unanswered questions that define the very essence of this world. Each era, marked by its own shadows and secrets, contributes to a legacy that transcends time, leaving us to ponder the truths that remain just out of reach. And that is the complete, every unsolved shadow of the Erdtree mystery timeline.